Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're heading out onto the open, snow-covered plains of North America, where the temperature has plummeted to a brutal 29°, and you've got no heated jacket, no GPS, and definitely no cell service. Just a teepee between you and the icy jaws of winter. Sounds cozy, right? Yeah, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is over there, because if it's already past midnight and you're listening to stories about survival in a frozen prairie, you're my kind of person. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a flat, frozen expanse. Snow is crusted in long, rippling sheets across the prairie. It squeaks under your moccasins. There's no forest to hide in, no cave to crawl into, just a merciless wind and an endless sky. White to the horizon. Your breath crystallizes mid-air. Welcome to the Great Plains in the dead of winter. You squint against the glare. The sun is low, sharp and cold as a blade. And right in front of you, rising like a warm heartbeat in the middle of all this frost, is a teepee. It's tall, proud, smoke curling lazily from the top. You don't know it yet, but that thing? That's one of the most efficient pieces of cold weather architecture ever designed by humans. Step closer. You hear the flap of hide in the wind. The snow around the base has been packed and built up in a way that seals off gaps. Inside there's movement, a glow of firelight, a silhouette brushing snow from her fur-lined cloak. And though the world out here wants to freeze your eyelashes shut, inside that teepee it's warm. Like actually warm. Not bearable, but you might take your mittens off warm. You're watching survival by design, not accident. The people of the plains didn't stumble into this, they engineered it. Cultures like the Lakota, Blackfoot and Cheyenne weren't just making do. They'd adapted deeply and precisely to this kind of cold. Not just the kind that makes you shiver, but the kind that splits wood with soundless cracks in the night. But don't imagine these communities as passive victims of the elements. Nope. They danced with winter, their movements, migration patterns, and even spiritual practices bent in harmony with the season. Living at 29°, wasn't just about staying alive, it was about living well, with dignity, in a space the unprepared wouldn't last a single night. Here's a quick historical fact for you. The Tipi as we picture it today, conical shape, smoke hole, fire inside, was refined over centuries by the nomadic peoples of the northern plains, especially once horses were reintroduced to North America in the 1700s. That's when tipis got larger and more mobile. Before that, smaller versions existed, still impressive, but without the full adaptability the horse allowed. Mobility became survival. You stayed just long enough to live, hunt, and wait out the worst weather. Then you were off again, poles and hide lashed to a travois, trailing behind a pony. Now here's a quirky little side note. Some winter teepees were lined with a second interior cover made from woven grass mats, bark, or extra hides. This liner created an insulating air gap between layers. Basically, they invented a prehistoric version of double glazing. Not bad for people supposedly primitive, huh? But not everything is agreed on. Scholars still debate whether teepees were primarily used all year round or mostly in warmer seasons, with alternate structures favoured during long, harsh winters. Some argue that semi-subterranean lodges or earth-covered homes were preferred when snow got too deep. Others say the tipi's adaptability made it a winter champion. The truth? Probably a mix. Cultures flexed their designs depending on need, terrain, and tribe. So, here you are, still standing in the snow. You finally tug open the flap and step inside. Instantly your skin says thank you. The air is warmer. You hear the gentle crackle of firewood. You smell smoke. Yes, but it's not choking. It's rising in controlled spirals up through the central hole. Around you, hides and furs are draped in soft folds. Children are curled beside a grandmother humming low, something rhythmic and old. A man adjusts the fire, not with panic, but with practiced ease. No one looks worried. They've done this before. Hundreds of times. You're the outsider, stunned that anything could live in this kind of cold. They've built a home here, one that laughs quietly in the face of Trintumsinituyus. That teepee? It's not just shelter, it's a system. Every part of it is doing something, every angle has a reason. And over the next few nights we're going to take it apart, pole by pole, stitch by stitch, and show you how this marvel came to be. From the moment they chose a snow-covered site to the late-night fire chats, ghost stories and warm stews that carried people through the long sleep months. You're not going to freeze, not tonight, but only because you're with the experts now. You wake to a muffled world, the kind of hush only snow brings. Outside the teepee, the wind still whispers across the plains, but it's softened, distant, like a memory you can't quite catch. Inside, the fire has burned low, casting warm shadows against the angled hide walls. Someone is already up, stirring embers back to life with quiet efficiency. You blink, adjust to the dim glow, and realise something surprising. You're not cold, not even a little. And yet, just beyond those hide walls, the temperature is still locked at 29, I'd say. That's the kind of cold that bites through denim, that makes your breath freeze on your eyelashes, that turns a leather strap brittle if you leave it outside too long. It's the kind of cold that doesn't just test you, it stalks you. So why aren't they panicking? Why isn't everyone huddled in misery, teeth chattering and fingers numbing? Because this isn't an emergency, this is routine. You step outside, moccasins crunching in the packed snow, and take a good look at the world around you. Teepees dot the frosted prairie like tall white sentinels. Their smoke holes send thin trails into a sky so blue it almost aches. Dogs trot between camps, their thick coats holding up just fine. A group of children is already chasing each other around a snowdrift, shrieking with laughter, frost clinging to their braids. You blink, it's not what you expected. This life wasn't random. It was designed step by step to make mobility not just possible but necessary. The Great Plains, stretching across the heart of North America, offered bounty in spring and summer, but come winter, staying put in one spot too long could mean starvation. You couldn't farm here like eastern tribes did. There were no permanent villages, no stone walls. Here, food moved, and so did people. Which brings us to the first rule of survival. You move with the herd. The Plains tribes, like the Lakota, Comanche, and Crow, weren't just random wanderers. They followed the buffalo, because the buffalo wasn't just meat, it was life. Its hide made your home, its bones became your tools, even its sinew became thread to stitch your world together. And the buffalo? It didn't stay in one place. So neither did you. Picture it. The seasons shift. Fall gives way to early frost. The buffalo start moving south or lower into the valleys where the snow won't cover the grass as deeply. You follow, not in panic, but in rhythm. Teepees are packed, poles tied to dogs or horses. What can't be carried is cached or burned. You move fast, efficiently. This is muscle memory passed through generations. Here's a key historical detail. Before horses arrived, brought back by the Spanish and eventually spreading north, dogs were the main beasts of burden. Plains tribes used a clever device called a travois. 2 long poles attached to a harness across a dog's back, dragging behind them in a V shape. On those poles, rolled hides, gear, sometimes even children too small to walk. It worked. It worked so well, in fact, that even when horses became widespread, the travois stayed in use, just scaled up. Now, quick detour into the strange. Did you know some tribes told stories of teepees walking themselves? Not literally, of course, but there were oral histories and symbolic tales passed down that described teepees rising and relocating under spirit guidance. Some anthropologists believe these stories reflect the deep spiritual connection between mobility and survival. That moving camp wasn't just practical, it was sacred. You didn't just go because you had to. You went because the land whispered that it was time. Still, this way of life has stirred plenty of debate among scholars. Some argue that nomadic movement made these cultures less developed, compared to those with fixed cities or agriculture. But others, more attuned to the genius of adaptability, see it differently. They point out that mobility was a form of mastery. In an environment where standing still meant death, the Tipi allowed families to pick up and rebuild a functional, insulated home in a matter of hours. That's not primitive. That's innovation tailored to survival. Watch closely now. The group is preparing to move camp even in this sub-zero weather. Maybe scouts or buffalo sign a few miles out. Maybe the wind is shifting. Maybe they just know. The signal is subtle, a flurry of motion. Women gathering supplies, men dismantling poles. Kids trained from birth know exactly how to help. There's no chaos, no yelling, just swift, practiced movement. The tipi is untied from its moorings. The cover, smoked, weathered hide, is folded and rolled. Poles are bundled and lashed. Within the hour, the space that held warmth, stories and sleep is just a patch of trampled snow and faint smoke. Mobility is freedom, but it's also survival calculus. You're not just packing up because it's fun. You're doing it because your whole food web just walks south. Stay too long, and you'll find yourself with an empty belly and frozen fingers. Move at the right time, you find fresh meat, fresh water, and a new patch of earth to call home. And you don't just build a tipi anywhere, you'll see. It matters how the land lies. It matters how the wind shifts. You need snowdrifts to shield from the gales, a water source not too frozen to drink from, and maybe even a tree line in the distance for wood. The choice of a campsite is part science, part instinct, and all experience. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? That this life isn't about braving the cold like some heroic ice warrior. It's about dancing with it, timing it, reading it, living with it instead of fighting against it. The tipi isn't just a shelter, it's a statement. We're not victims of this place. We are part of it. And now that you know what's at stake, why mobility means life, it's time to look closer at the next piece of the survival puzzle, the thing that makes your shelter more than just a cold cone of poles. It's time to meet the buffalo up close and understand just how deeply every strand of hide was woven into your world. You spot it first from a rise in the land, a dark, shaggy mass moving against the wind, like part of the prairie has come to life. Buffalo, or more accurately, American bison, though no one here calls them that. To you, they're wildlife. To the people around you, they're sacred. Their ancestors, supermarket, clothing store, hardware shop, and heating system, all rolled into one snorting, snow-dusted beast. And right now, they're also the thing standing between life and death in a winter that's trying its absolute best to erase everything, not wearing a coat of fur and 6 inches of muscle. At 20 Tastierxi, almost nothing grows. Frozen grasses offer just enough nutrition to keep the herds alive, and the herds in turn keep people alive. But it's not just about meat. Not here. Not when you're building homes out of the creatures you hunt. Because what you're really looking at, hoof to horn, is a walking shelter. Here's a truth that hits hard the first time you hear it. A single buffalo, if processed correctly, can provide enough hide to create a full tipi covering for a small family. And that's not including all the other parts. Bones for tools, sinew for thread, fat for tallow candles, and stomach lining for containers. This wasn't just hunting, it was transformation. A buffalo didn't die, it became everything. The process of turning a buffalo into a shelter begins long before the snow falls. In the warmer months, when hides are easiest to work with, women, the undisputed masters of this craft, stretch, scrape, and smoke each hide with astonishing care. It's dirty, smelly, back-breaking work. You sit beside them now, watching as they bend over wooden frames, scraping away flesh with tools made from bone or carved antler. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. Scrape, soften, stretch, over and over. One hide isn't enough. You'll need anywhere from 12 to 20 buffalo hides for a full-size tipi cover, depending on the size of the structure. And not just any hides, they need to be from cows, ideally killed in late fall when the hair is thick and the skin durable. Bulls? Too tough. Summer hides? Too thin. There's nuance in every layer. Once the hides are prepped, they're stitched together using sinew or rawhide strips. The result is a thick, semi-flexible skin that can be folded, rolled, and unrolled across poles in minutes. But when it's in place and tensioned properly, it becomes shockingly strong. Snow slides right off it. Rain doesn't soak it. Wind may flap it, but it won't tear. And here's a detail you might not expect. Smoke. Specifically, smoke tanning. Unlike chemical tanning used today, these hides are smoked to preserve them, make them more water resistant, and give them that signature warm golden colour. The smoke also adds a mild scent. Earthy, rich, a little bitter, which becomes part of the home itself. You never really forget it. Now for something on the quirky side, some hides used in tipis were decorated not just for beauty, but as living family records. Pictographs painted in ochre, charcoal, or even animal blood showed visions, battles, migrations, births, and losses. A tipi wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a canvas, a storybook. In some camps you could walk a circle at night and read an entire people's history one hide at a time. But even with all that effort, not every teepee had new covers every year. Sometimes old hides were patched, layered, or combined. A family might keep the same cover for multiple winters, repairing tiers with care, replacing only the most damaged panels. In some communities, well-used hides from elders' teepees were honoured, even revered, like heirlooms. You weren't just sleeping under a roof, you were wrapped in your grandmother's skill. Scholars still argue over how frequently these coverings were replaced. Some say every year, given the wear and tear of life on the plains. Others believe high-quality hides, especially those meticulously smoked and cared for, could last several seasons. The truth likely varied, depending on tribe, season, resources, and even the mood of the buffalo herds. Right now, as you run your hand along the inside of a finished hide, you can feel its texture. Tough, but not stiff. There's a soft give, like leather that's known many winters. The colour is warm amber, darkened in places where soot has kissed it. These hides aren't just materials, they're co-conspirators in survival. You don't live through Rodosnosticsir with rough guesses and scraps. You live because someone, likely your grandmother or her sister, knew exactly how thick a winter hide needed to be, exactly how many layers were worth the extra weight, and exactly how to stitch it so that not even the wind could find a way in. You hear laughter, someone joking that the buffalo don't know how famous they are. And it's true. The creatures out there now, munching frozen grass with steam curling from their noses, don't know they're central to one of the most effective cold weather engineering systems in human history. You watch the hunters head out, spears and bows slung over their backs. It's no small thing, taking down a buffalo, especially in winter. There's danger, always. Broken ribs, trampled bodies, long, bitter treks to drag the kill home. But there's also purpose, and when the kill is made, when the hide is brought back and draped across poles, when smoke rises once again through the centre of a warm, dry space, you understand. You understand completely. The tipi isn't just a shelter, it's a buffalo. Flattened, stretched, stitched, and honoured. You don't survive a winter like this without respect, for the animals, the people who prepare them, and the long memory of how it all came to be. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we learn how those hides meet the sky, because a pile of leather on the ground is just that, until the poles go up. The snow has stopped falling for now. Everything outside sparkles with a blinding kind of silence, the kind of silence that feels almost like pressure, like the land is holding its breath. You step out of the teepee and your boots crunch into a fresh layer of powder. It's so cold the air stings your nostrils and even blinking feels slow. But this morning isn't about admiring the view. Today you're building a home. Picking the right spot isn't just a matter of preference. It's the first and most important decision of the day. A wrong decision means a night of freezing winds sneaking under the hides or waking up buried in a snowdrift. You're not looking for beauty. You're looking for shelter from the shelter. So you walk with one of the elders, your breath puffing clouds into the morning air. His steps are slow but deliberate. He knows what to look for, a slight rise in the land, high enough that melting snow won't turn the floor to slush, but not so exposed that wind will slam into the teepee like a fist. Ideally, the opening of the teepee will face east, catching the morning sun to warm the space and away from the harshest western winds. You stop near a low stand of scrub trees. There's a ridge just behind the spot acting like a natural windbreak. The snow is thin here, blown away by previous storms. Less digging required. He nods once, says nothing, and begins to mark the centre of the circle with the blunt end of a stick. This is where it begins, right here in the snow. The site is sacred, not just in a ceremonial way, but in a practical one. Here is where your fire will burn. Here is where your children will sleep. Here is where your bones might one day rest. Picking it is a quiet ritual. You don't rush. You feel the land, not just see it. And here's the historical detail you might not expect. The diameter of a teepee was often standardized within families. Some teepees were just 12 feet across, sufficient for a couple or small family. But larger ones, built for extended families, might stretch up to 25 feet across, towering over the landscape like living monuments. The size dictated everything. How many poles you'd need, how many hides, how many people to set it all up. You never went into a build blind. Once the spot is chosen, you begin to clear it. The snow is shoveled away with wide, flat tools. sometimes wooden, sometimes just repurposed shoulder bones from buffalo. You scrape down until you reach solid earth or the hard-packed layer of older snow beneath. Around the perimeter, people pack snow into a low ring, a cold weather trick that insulates the base of the teepee and acts as a kind of frost wall, preventing drafts from crawling up through the bottom. Here's something a little fringe. Some plains people believe that disturbing the snow too much on a chosen spot could invite spirits of the land to become restless or unsettled. So the clearing is done gently, respectfully. There's no stomping, no shouting. Just the soft, methodical push of tools through white. Once the ground is clear, you start to assemble the pole base. But we'll get to that in a bit. Right now, just stand back for a moment and imagine what this space will be. The people working around you aren't contractors or architects. They're your family, your neighbours, your tribe. Everyone helps. Even the smallest children carry bundles of cord or brush snow off the poles. It's a communal act, almost ceremonial, and it has to be fast. At 24 Nandakis, fingers freeze in minutes. Every task is measured against the clock of cold. There's a deeper debate here among scholars. Some argue that teepee locations were mostly utilitarian, picked for weather and proximity to water or game. Others insist that site selection carried spiritual weight, that certain places were returned to again and again because of ancestral significance. Which is true, maybe both. Because when you live in a world where every winter could be your last, practical and sacred are often the same thing. Now the ground is ready, the snow ring is packed. Someone brings the 3 main poles, the start of everything. These will form the tripod, the heart of the teepee's strength. But before those go up, there's one more glance at the sky. The clouds are thin now, stretched like cotton pulled apart. Wind is still, but no one expects that to last. You've got maybe an hour of calm before things get sharp again. You squat beside the centre mark, breath coming out in soft, steady plumes. Everything's quiet, not silent, there's always some sound, but quiet in a way that lets you think. And in that stillness, you realise something. This isn't just survival. This is an act of control. In a world ruled by wind and snow, building a teepee is how you say, not today, not us. We choose to stay warm. We choose to live. And that's what the circle is. A choice. You didn't build here by accident. You found this place, you read the signs, and you answered the land in its own language. Tomorrow there'll be a fire inside, laughter maybe, food passed hand to hand, stories told until the walls blur into the dark. But tonight, it begins with nothing more than a ring of snow and a promise, and now it's time for the bones to rise. You kneel beside the cleared circle of snow, breath steady, fingertips tingling from the cold. Around you, the prairie stretches endlessly, blanketed in frost, sky pale and unforgiving. And at your side lie 3 long, stripped wooden poles, weathered smooth by hand and time, each one taller than 2 men stacked end to end. They're heavy, but not impossibly so, strong enough to hold up your shelter through a blizzard. Light enough to carry when the buffalo move, these 3 poles are about to become the skeleton of your home. Now, here's the quiet magic of tipi construction. It always starts with 3. Not 4, not 5, just 3. These aren't just any poles either. They're chosen carefully, straight as possible, stripped of bark, seasoned against rot. Lodgepole pine is the favourite if you can get it. Tough, flexible, and grows long and narrow, like it was born to be a teepee pole. But out here, where trees are rare and winter cruel, you use what you have. Birch, spruce, even tall willow in a pinch. You lay the first pole flat and tie the second to it near the top, using a long rawhide rope. The third comes next, forming a triangle, all 3 lashed together at one end. It's not complicated, but it's precise. The length of the lashing has to be just right. Tight enough to hold, loose enough to spread the legs once you raise it. This is the moment where the ground and the sky first connect. Someone calls out, and you all move as one. You lift. Shoulders hunched, palms red and raw. The poles rise slowly, their tops scraping the white sky like fingers reaching up for warmth. The bottom ends dig into the snow, spread into a stable tripod, and just like that, your teepee has begun to exist. Here's the engineering fact of the day. The tripod structure distributes weight evenly, making it incredibly stable even in high winds. It creates a foundation that doesn't need nails or screws or heavy support beams. The rest of the poles, anywhere from 9 to 15 more, will rest against this initial frame. creating the conical shape. Each one angled just so, crossing over at the top, locked in by gravity and tension. You step back and admire the geometry. It's stunning, honestly. Elegant in a way that feels timeless. And maybe it is. This technique has been used for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. Passed down not with blueprints or measurements, but through demonstration, repetition and memory. You don't learn tipi building in school, you learn it with your hands. But before the rest of the poles can go up, you pause to consider their arrangement. Not just randomly stacked. No, there's order. The back poles, the ones facing the prevailing wind, are placed first, strongest ones too. The sides come next, then the front. The last two poles are special. They'll hold the smoke flaps, acting like adjustable wings for your chimney. We'll come back to those later. There's something strangely moving about this whole process. Something graceful, like watching a bird skeleton come together in real time. One by one, poles are lifted and placed with careful choreography. No rushing, no yelling. Even the kids know when to move in and when to stay back. This isn't construction, it's performance. Every action is smooth, born from repetition. By the time you place the final pole, you realise you're not cold anymore. Not because the temperature changed, but because the work has taken over. And here's something you probably didn't expect. No two tipis are exactly alike. Sure, the structure follows the same principles, but the details vary. Height, angle, pole count, how tightly the cover will be drawn, all depend on the builder's preference, family size, or even local climate quirks. Some tipis lean slightly backward, others stand straight as arrows. Some cultures use 13 poles, others use 17. The Blackfoot often went big and tall, while the Kiowa favoured wider bases. This was architecture with identity, not uniformity. Now let's veer into something a little weird. According to some oral traditions, the number of poles held symbolic meaning. In certain tribes, each one represented a specific principle, like bravery, honesty, or humility. The final pole, the one completing the circle, might be called the pole of balance. No written records confirm this across the board, but the idea lingers. Even if it's more metaphor than math, it fits. There's something deeply intentional in the way this skeleton rises from the earth. Still, scholars debate whether this symbolism was widely shared or more localized, maybe even added later by romanticized storytelling. Some argue it's more likely that efficiency and structural needs dictated the pole count, not abstract values. But standing here, watching these lines of wood reach into the sky like a frozen cathedral, it's hard not to feel like there's meaning in every angle. By now, the tipi skeleton is complete. 17 poles, evenly spaced, rising from a ring of snow-packed ground, tied together at the top, open slightly to allow smoke to escape. The door gap, low and narrow, has been left facing east, toward the rising sun. Not for poetic reasons, partly for poetic reasons, but also because cold winds usually sweep from the northwest. That door placement isn't just symbolic, it's smart. Now step back, look at what you've built. It isn't enclosed yet, still a cage of bare poles, but already it holds space. It casts a shadow, it feels like shelter. In the time it takes most people to shovel a driveway, you've raised a framework that can withstand gales, support a fire, and cradle a family through a blizzard. There's something humbling about it too. How much you can do with so little. No concrete, no wires, just wood, rawhide, snow, and a whole lot of inherited knowledge. The kind of knowledge that comes not from books, but from living inside your own history. Tomorrow, the hides will go up. You'll stretch them around these bones like skin over muscle. You'll seal yourself inside warmth and firelight and smoke. But tonight, the frame stands proud against the cold sky, a promise of safety waiting to be fulfilled. You breathe in the sharp air and feel the ache in your arms, the sting of snow melting on your wrists, and the quiet, powerful sense of knowing. You're learning how to build a home the old way, and that means you're learning how to survive. The skeleton stands against the pale winter sky, a perfect cone of poles reaching upward, casting long shadows across the snow. It's not a home yet, not until the hides go on, but already there's a sense of presence, of shape. The wind moves around it differently now, curling in eddies instead of slicing through. The land seems to recognise it, and so do you. Now comes the part that's deceptively simple and secretly exhausting. Preparing and raising the rest of the poles, and you're going to need more than just 3. A full-sized winter tipi can use anywhere from 15 to 20 poles, depending on its width and height. And no, you don't just find these poles lying around. Not out here, not in the middle of this snow-bitten prairie where trees are as rare as warm toes. So how do you get 20 straight 20-foot poles with no Home Depot in sight? You remember that little forest you passed days ago, hugging the edge of a frozen creek bed? That was the source. These poles were cut and hauled, sometimes weeks before, during late fall or early winter, before snow got too deep. If you're lucky, you've got horses or a dog team to help drag them. If not, it's your back, your hands, and the raw determination that defines every step of life out here. The poles are lodgepole pine if you're really lucky. Lightweight, tall, and nearly perfect in their straightness. But some tribes worked with what was available. Cedar in the north, spruce in colder mountain regions, even cottonwood in a pinch, though that stuff warps and snaps if you look at it sideways. Each pole must be peeled of bark, stripped down to its core. Why? Bark holds moisture. Moisture holds cold, and in deep winter that can turn a pole into a frost magnet. Dangerous not just for structural reasons, but because it saps the warmth from inside the teepee. Peeling is a task done by firelight and patience. You sit, knife in hand, scraping length after length, turning wood into something more than just lumber. It becomes part of a system. Each one must be clean, dry, and smoothed down, not for looks, but for durability. Rough poles can catch on hides, tear stitching, or snap under stress. In the snow, even the smallest rip can spell a night of drafts and shivers. Here's a curious detail. In some winter camps, poles were reused across seasons, cached in hidden groves or buried under snow to be retrieved the next year. Why go through the effort? Because hauling 20 poles through snowdrifts, sometimes dozens of miles, is exhausting even when you're a seasoned traveller. So when possible, you stash them. Sometimes entire families would return to familiar spots just because they knew their poles were waiting. Pre-installed convenience, 18th century style. But there's a little-known risk with that method, rodents and insects. If the poles weren't smoked, elevated, or properly wrapped, mice could gnaw the ends and beetles could bore into the wood, and out here, a chewed or weakened pole could mean collapse. So before any cached poles are used, they're inspected thoroughly. Tap it. Check the grain. Look for fresh bore holes. The tipi might be temporary, but you don't gamble on its bones. Now you've got your full collection laid out. Poles sorted, lengths matched, each one assigned its position. The tripod from yesterday holds firm. You begin lifting the rest of the poles, one by one, each carefully leaned into place, crossing and nesting into the top cluster that will bear the weight of the entire structure. It's less like building and more like weaving. Each pole fits into an invisible pattern, familiar but never written down. The last 2 poles are saved for a specific job. They'll hold the smoke, flaps open or closed once the hide cover is on. Think of them as the teepee's lungs. You'll manoeuvre them from the ground using long forked sticks, adjusting for wind direction, keeping your indoor fire breathing just right. Too wide, and snow blows in. Too narrow, and you risk smoke choking the space. It's not just an art. It's a science with zero margin for error when you're living in a leather cone in the dead of winter. As you work, you're not alone. The entire camp moves in rhythm. Neighbours drift by, offering help, teasing jokes, swapping stories. There's no instruction manual, just shared muscle memory passed down like lullabies. A teenager untangles a ball of rawhide cord and starts securing the final cluster of poles together with practiced fingers. She doesn't measure anything. She doesn't need to. Her grandmother taught her how tight the lashing should feel in the palm, how it should sing slightly when tugged, but not vibrate. That's the kind of detail you can't write down. You have to live it. Here's a bit of cultural intrigue. In some traditions, only women could own the teepee, because they were considered the heart of the home. The structure built communally belonged to the woman whose family slept inside it. She maintained it, organised it, and had full authority over what happened beneath its roof. So while the men might hunt or scout or defend, it was the woman who decided where the tipi would rise and when it would come down. That sense of ownership wasn't decorative, it was foundational. but not everyone agrees. Some historians debate whether this matrilineal control applied equally across all plains cultures, or whether it was more common among certain tribes like the Lakota or Hidatsa. Still, the image of a woman standing beside a tipi frame, arms crossed, inspecting her home skeleton before giving the nod to begin the cover, that's real. And it tells you everything about who really ran things in these cold weather worlds. By the end of the day, the poles are up. The tipi is a lattice of shadow and light against the pale snow, its cone not yet covered but fully alive. Wind rushes through it now, whistling between the gaps, but you already feel the shape of safety. A space designed not to stop the wind, but to work with it, bend it, guide it upward and away. Tomorrow, the hides will go on. Tomorrow this becomes a home, but tonight, you rest. Arms aching, face wind-burned, heart steady. You're building a shelter designed not just to resist winter, but to dance with it. Morning breaks, pale and silver, like the sky can't decide whether it wants to wake up or crawl back under the clouds. You, however, don't have that luxury. The tipi's bones stand tall, rigid against the cold, and today they're getting their skin. This is the moment where wood and hide, shape and purpose finally meet. And it starts with a long, weather-softened roll of buffalo hide. Actually a mosaic of many hides, stitched edge to edge, tanned, smoked, and shaped into something not only weatherproof but nearly alive with memory. You've seen this hide before. It was folded beside the fire, patched in places, worn thin in others. You didn't understand it then, but now, as you and the others unroll it across the snow, letting the wind ripple its thick surface like a heavy sail, you start to see it for what it really is. A blanket big enough to hold a family through the worst nights winter can throw at you. First, you lay it flat, fur side in, smoother side out. Each seam between the hides, stitched with sinew or raw hide, is a testimony to hours of labour. Sometimes you can even see where the thread has been replaced or reinforced. The cover isn't one solid piece. It's usually cut in a half-circle shape, wide enough to wrap almost entirely around the conical frame of poles. A flap extends from the top for the smoke hole, and a row of small holes dots the front edges. This is where the tipi pins will go, binding the structure closed like a winter coat. You lift the hide carefully. This isn't a solo job. It takes at least 3 people, sometimes more if the tipi is tall. One person anchors the bottom edge while others grab the upper corners, hoisting the hide with a forked pole. The weight is no joke. Even dry, this much buffalo hide is a muscular challenge, and when you're trying to balance it on a pole, keep it from dragging in snow, and align it with the top of the frame, let's just say there's no time to worry about your frozen fingers. Here's a cool historical fact. The hide cover was often customized to a specific pole arrangement, meaning one family's cover wouldn't necessarily fit another family's frame. So these were not interchangeable shelters. Each one was tailored, just like the people inside them. You raise the hide slowly, pushing it upward until it crests the top of the pole cluster. Then, with one smooth pull, you let it fall down the far side of the frame like a great curtain. It settles with a soft whoomp, instantly transforming the frame into something solid. Warmth seems to radiate from it already, even though the fire hasn't been lit. It's a visual trick maybe, or just wishful thinking, but the moment the cover is draped, the tipi starts to feel alive. Now comes the alignment. You tug the edges around the frame, pulling them snug across the poles. It's not symmetrical. It's designed to overlap in front like a coat folded across the chest. The overlapping flaps will be pinned together with wooden pegs, usually made from willow or other flexible hardwood. Each one slides into a matched pair of holes punched along the seam. One by one, you press them in. Tight, but not so tight you can't remove them later. It's a bit like lacing up the front of a tent, only your tent is made of animal hide and might save your life tonight. The bottom edge of the hide is tucked under and weighted down with snow or rocks, depending on the weather. This creates a seal, primitive but effective, that stops the wind from crawling in. In the dead of winter, it might also be banked with packed snow, a trick that both insulates and reinforces the base. And now, for a little quirky bonus, bone tools were often used to punch the holes for the pegs and to scrape or soften the hides during prep. Some of these tools were shaped like little awls or chisels, carved from the leg bones of deer or buffalo. Families often passed them down, their surfaces polished from decades of use, so somewhere in that hide cover, marks made by someone's great-grandmother. With the hide fully draped and secured, attention turns to the smoke flaps. These odd wing-like extensions at the top aren't decorative, they're functional. They control the draw of air and smoke through the tipi's apex. Depending on the wind, you'll adjust them using 2 long poles attached to their corners. If wind comes from the north, you angle the south flap open and the north one closed. If it's still, you open both. You'll learn fast, or you'll smoke yourself out like a novice. Here's where things get interesting. There's open scholarly debate about how exactly winter adaptations changed the standard tipi cover. Some argue that an extra lining of hide or woven mats was added to the interior, creating a dead air space that functioned like insulation. Others believe additional hides were sometimes layered over the outside during particularly harsh spells. No single method was universal, just a series of adaptations suited to tribe, region, and available resources. What's clear, though, is that the basic hide cover was a masterpiece of design. Thick, wind-resistant, flexible, and durable. You crawl inside through the small opening cut low on the east-facing front. It's dark in here, cool, quiet, faintly scented with smoke and buffalo fat. The light filtering through the hide walls is dim, like being underwater. The wind is muffled. The cold? Still there, but dulled, held at bay. You sit, knees tucked, and run your hand along the inner wall. It's not soft exactly, but it has give, like the inside of a well-worn boot. Outside, the others are smoothing the hide, tamping snow at the base, checking for gaps. Any flap or ripple could become a cold leak tonight, so it's all hands on. Someone tosses you a roll of extra hide, a patch kit of sorts, and you take it without thinking. That's how it is here. You build together, fix together, live together. And when they're done, they step back and look. Not to admire exactly, but to confirm. A tipi well covered isn't a brag, it's a necessity. It means your kids will sleep without frost on their lashes. It means your fire will stay in, and the snow will stay out. The poles were the bones, the hide is the skin. Tomorrow you'll light the fire and give it breath. But tonight, as the wind picks up and brushes snow against the new wall of hide, you press your palm against it and feel something extraordinary. You're inside a buffalo, not in the messy way, in the sacred way, and you're about to be warm. The light outside dims into the long blue-grey shadows of evening. Wind picks up again, more insistent now, slicing across the prairie like a blade dipped in ice. Out there it's teeth chattering, frostbite in 15 minutes cold. But in here, in the freshly covered tipi you helped raise and skin with buffalo hide, it's about to get toasty. At the centre of the floor, a shallow fire pit has been cleared. Just a shallow ring of packed earth ringed with small stones. Nothing fancy. You might expect a roaring fire, logs stacked like a pioneer postcard. But that's not how it works in a tipi. This fire won't be big, it won't be dramatic, but it will keep you alive. And more than that, it'll keep you comfortable. And let's be honest, comfort at 20 instantes is basically a miracle. The fire is laid with care. Small kindling first, dried buffalo dung, yes, seriously, mixed with twigs, bark, and little chips of dry wood scavenged from wherever the last campsite allowed. It sounds unappealing until you realise that buffalo dung burns hot, clean and slow. In treeless places, it's basically gold. Early European visitors called it prairie coal, and no, they didn't appreciate it until they were freezing their butts off in a blizzard. You strike the flint, catch the spark and nurse it into a flame with a bit of breath. The kindling hisses to life, and smoke begins its upward spiral, warm and lazy. As the fire builds, a few larger sticks are added. Nothing massive, just enough to keep a small, steady burn going. That's the trick. You're not trying to heat a mansion, you're trying to warm a cone. Now look up. The smoke hole at the top of the tipi, where all the poles meet, is open. Above it, the 2 smoke flaps have been positioned using long poles you guide from the ground. One tilted back, one angled forward, forming a kind of vent that channels smoke up and out, while pulling fresh air in from below. It's ventilation via negative pressure, and if that sounds too technical, just know this: it works like magic. Here's your fun historical fact. The Plains tribes understood airflow better than most frontier architects. Their tipis function like passive ventilation systems. The conical shape creates an updraft, and the adjustable smoke flaps let the fire breathe. Too much smoke? Adjust the flaps. Wind changes direction. Re-angle them. If you manage it right, you can burn a fire all night and still breathe like you're outside. And yes, it takes practice. Lots of it. If you open the flaps too wide during a wind gust, you'll suck freezing air straight down into the Tipi like a reverse chimney. Keep them too tight and smoke builds up fast, choking everyone and setting off a coughing fit that's equal parts dangerous and annoying. This is why kids here learn how to read the wind before they learn how to hunt. You sit back and feel it now. That first real wave of heat. Not just a hint. Not the fake, oh, it's kind of warmer feeling you get from huddling over your hands. No, this is deep warmth. Your back starts to relax. Your fingers tingle as blood returns. The inside of the hide begins to release that slightly sweet, earthy smell of smoke-tanned leather. The tipi starts to smell like home. What's really happening here is thermal layering. The fire heats the air, which rises, and the shape of the tipi pushes it upward while pulling in cooler air near the base. But since the lower area is where you're sitting, and likely covered in furs and robes, you stay comfortably in the warm zone. You might even strip off your outer parka or let your boots dry near the fire. Yes, drying your boots is a whole routine, because wet moccasins in winter are pretty much a death sentence. Here's something quirky. Some tipis had fire pits with embedded stones, partially buried around the perimeter. These stones absorbed heat during the night and released it slowly, helping to maintain temperature even when the fire died down. It wasn't exactly radiant floor heating, but it was close enough to make you sigh with pleasure at 3 a.m. when you woke up still warm. Now, there's a debate among historians and anthropologists about just how efficient the tipi fire was in deep winter. Some argue that it couldn't have done much more than make the air marginally less unbearable. Others say that, combined with proper bedding, floor insulation, and body heat, it made the interior feel not just survivable, but pleasant. Anecdotal accounts from 19th century fur traders and travellers support the latter. They often preferred sleeping in a tipi over a log cabin, precisely because of how cosy it could be once the fire and hides worked in harmony. And speaking of bedding, you're starting to notice another trick. The floor isn't bare, it's layered. First comes a lining of soft pine needles or dry grass, depending on what's available. Over that, buffalo hides are laid fur side up. Some families even had woven rush mats or fur robes to add cushion and warmth. All this keeps your body off the frozen ground, which is essential. Direct contact with snow or ice leeches heat faster than you can blink. Inside the tipi now, people are settling in for the night. A kettle of stew simmers gently on the tripod above the fire, metal if it's available, clay or hide pouch boiling if not. Someone stirs it lazily, and the scent of bison meat and root vegetables fills the space. The fire crackles low, casting orange flickers on the hide walls. Shadows shift gently with every pop of the flame. You sit, legs crossed, wrapped in a fur robe, and just exist for a moment. You're inside a hand-built buffalo hide home, warmed by a 4-foot fire, protected by knowledge passed down across generations. Outside, it's still. Shh, the wind still howls, but in here there's food, laughter, light, and safety. And maybe that's what's most powerful about the tipi fire. Not just that it keeps you warm, but that it reminds you, hour after hour, that you've outsmarted the cold once again. Tomorrow you'll learn how smoke flaps respond to shifting winds, and why they're the ultimate low-tech, high-skill HVAC system. But for tonight, let the fire burn low, let the shadows dance. And maybe, just maybe, you won't need that extra blanket after all. It's the middle of the night, and something wakes you. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The fire has burned low, and the once steady crackling is now just a faint tick of cooling embers. The tipi is dim, the glow barely enough to illuminate the curve of the hide walls. But what pulls you out of sleep isn't the dark, it's the shifting of air. A subtle draft brushing over your cheek like the cold is politely letting you know it's still out there, waiting for an invitation in. You sit up, careful not to disturb the warm bundle of fur you've been curled inside. It's quiet except for a low snore from the opposite side of the tipi and the occasional groan of wind pressing gently against the hide. You blink toward the apex of the tipi and see it. A faint trickle of smoke hovering where it shouldn't, caught in hesitation just beneath the smoke hole. That's your cue. Welcome to the midnight dance of the smoke flaps. These aren't just decorative little wings at the top of the teepee, they're your exhaust vents, your wind deflectors, your early warning carbon monoxide detectors. Adjusting them is second nature to anyone raised in one of these homes, but for a newcomer like you, it's an art form that balances physics, instinct, and a whole lot of don't screw this up. The flaps are made from two triangular extensions of the hide cover, stitched and reinforced to be semi-rigid, but still responsive to the wind. Each one is attached to a long control pole that extends down to the ground. By twisting and angling these poles, you can open or close the flaps to regulate airflow. Think of it like tuning a wind instrument, except the instrument is your roof, and the wrong note means a room full of smoke or a direct shot of freezing wind to the back of the neck. You step quietly toward the poles, wrapped in a robe, eyes half-lidded from sleep. Outside, the wind has shifted direction. Earlier, it was out of the northwest. Now it comes from the east, sneaky, subtle, but enough to reverse the pull of the updraft inside the teepee. You reach for the flap poles, lifting one to close the east flap and opening the west one just a little wider. The air inside shifts almost immediately. Smoke, which had been sluggish and sullen, begins to rise again, spiralling neatly through the centre. The warmth starts to stabilise. This isn't high-tech, but it is high skill. Historical records from the 1800s are filled with admiration and confusion from settlers and traders who stayed in teepees and marvelled at how effectively they ventilated. Many tried to copy the design and failed. Why? Because it's not just the shape, it's the responsiveness. A teepee isn't a static house, it's a living structure. It needs care, attention, and someone who knows when to tilt a flap or shift a pole at 3 a.m, with fingers half frozen and eyes still full of dreams. Here's a quirky fact you probably didn't know. In some tribes, certain smoke flap positions were culturally symbolic. The flaps might be angled in a specific way for ceremonies, or to signify that a guest was welcome, or not. Some say a tipi with both flaps wide open was considered an invitation. Others say it meant the opposite. We're ventilating because something stinks, go away! Either way, the flaps weren't just airflow tools, they were subtle communicators, like eyebrows for your house. Now let's drift into the scholarly weeds for a moment. Anthropologists still debate the true thermal efficiency of teepees. Some claim that even the best smoke flap configuration couldn't hold enough heat during a full-force blizzard. Others point to documented cases where interior temperatures in a well-managed tipi could stay above freezing, even when it was 30 degrees or lower outside. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. It depended on the number of people inside, the thickness of the lining, the quality of the hide, and yes, how good you were at managing those smoke flaps in the dark. You settle back down by the fire, and this time, you don't sleep right away. You watch the smoke now flowing smoothly upward, the ember glow flickering like a heartbeat against the hide walls. Everyone else still sleeps, trusting you to do what needs doing. It's a small role, but important. A badly angled flap can fill the space with soot in minutes. A perfect one. It creates a silent system of rising warmth, cycling air, and stable comfort. And let's talk about that warmth. It's a soft, heavy warmth, not dry or blowing, but gathered and layered. It doesn't fight the cold, it outsmarts it. The smoke flaps are part of that intelligence. They let the fire exist without suffocating you. They invite the wind in when it's useful, and block it out when it's cruel. They're dialogue, not defence. As dawn starts to tease the horizon, painting it in strokes of silver and pale rose, you do one final adjustment. You close one flap slightly, just to hold in the warmth a little longer before morning chores begin. Outside, the wind picks up again, brushing snow across the landscape in rippling sheets. But inside, the air remains calm. The fire glows, the hide walls stand strong, and the smoke, that delicate ribbon of survival, rises clean and clear into the winter sky. Tonight, you learned how to breathe inside a snow-covered world. Tomorrow, you'll learn how snow, yes, actual snow, can help keep the warmth in. Morning comes without fanfare. No dramatic sunrise, no golden beams slicing through the clouds. Just a quiet, steady light that feels more like a whisper than a greeting. The air inside the teepee is cool now. The fire has burned down to embers again, but it's not frigid. You roll over, stretch beneath your buffalo robe and listen. Outside, the wind has gone quiet. Too quiet. That means snow. You sit up and peel back the flap of hide over the doorway. The world has transformed. Overnight, a thick, clean snowfall has buried everything in soft white silence. Snow clings to the teepee's lower edges, forming a pale skirt. The landscape is barely recognizable, blanketed and smooth, broken only by the gentle tracks of a passing rabbit and the subtle outlines of other tipis rising like pale peaks across the camp. Here's the wild part. You're about to go outside not to fight the snow, but to use it. Because snow, despite being the thing that tries to freeze your eyebrows off, is also one of the most effective insulators available in nature. You've seen it work on animals, how a thick snowfall actually warms the dens of foxes or buries hibernating bears in a kind of thermal cocoon. The people here know that trick too, and they use it. You grab a wide flat scraper, a tool made from old antler or curved wood, and begin scooping snow up against the outside base of the teepee. Not randomly, not sloppily. There's a method. You pack it in a thick band around the lower hide, about a foot high and several inches thick. The snow seals any gaps between the hide and the ground, filling cracks where wind could sneak in. It becomes a natural windbreak, hugging the teepee like a down comforter. It's counterintuitive, using cold to fight cold, but it works. And here's your historical fact. Teepee bases were often reinforced with snowbanks during winter, especially when tribes settled for longer stretches. The practice wasn't just about sealing in heat, it also anchored the structure against high winds. A teepee lashed well and snowbanked properly could take on prairie gusts that would knock over smaller wooden cabins. It might flap and creak like an old sail, but it wouldn't fall. You move with others from your lodge, everyone working together in practice silence. Snow is packed tight with wooden paddles, hands wrapped in fur mittens. Children help too, stomping the snow in place with tiny feet like it's a game, which, let's be honest, it kind of is. There's laughter, the occasional snowball, but underneath it all there's purpose. This isn't just playtime, it's maintenance, it's security. Some people even take it a step further, creating double snow walls or forming curved drifts that help channel wind away from the door. You can get fancy with it, sculpting the snow like masonry, stacking it in slabs or even digging little cold traps, low dips outside the entrance where frigid air collects and stays low, never quite reaching the inside. And here's the quirky part. Snow, when properly packed, is quiet. After a snowbank is formed around the base of the teepee, the entire interior soundscape changes. Voices are muffled, footsteps softened. The fire crackles a little more audibly. It's like someone pressed a mute button on the world outside. Some families even report that food tastes better in the winter teepee, not because of the ingredients, but because the quiet makes everything more intimate. Now, this technique of using snow for insulation isn't without its debates. Some anthropologists argue that snowbanking was only used by northern tribes, the Cree, Assiniboine or Blackfoot, while southern plains tribes had no need or access to enough snowfall for this method. Others insist that it was widespread, simply modified to suit local conditions. There's even debate about whether snow was ever used on the inside, between the inner lining and the outer hide. That's likely fiction, but it does raise a good question. Just how far did they go to insulate their homes? What's certain is this. When the snow was deep, and the temperatures dropped below 20 or 30 degrees C, snow became part of the toolkit. Not just something to endure, but something to use. It's the same mindset that turned buffalo bones into needles and dung into fuel. Use everything, waste nothing. Even the enemy can be turned into an ally if you understand it well enough. Back inside, the difference is immediate. The base is sealed. The floor feels warmer. There's no draft nipping at your ankles anymore. The fire doesn't have to work as hard. Smoke rises cleanly through the centre. Someone tosses a few more chips of dried wood into the coals and nudges a pot of water toward the flames. Tea is coming. Maybe stew, maybe both. And here's the sensory detail you didn't expect. Snowbanks smell different. After you pack them around the teepee, there's a cold cleanness in the air, like iron and pine and silence all mixed together. It filters the air, muffles the wind, and leaves everything inside the lodge feeling, not warmer exactly, but less exposed. The insulation isn't just physical, it's psychological. You feel safer. By midday, the snowbanks are firm. The sun peeks through once or twice. more symbolic than warming, and the wind starts to return. It pushes at the walls of the teepee again, looking for weakness. But the hide is tight, the snow is strong, and you're sealed in. It's not a bunker, it's not a fortress, but it's enough. Out here, that's the goal. Not to dominate nature, just to outwit it. And tonight, as the fire burns low and the snow holds fast to the edge of your home, you'll sleep knowing that even the coldest part of winter has been turned into part of your defence. Tomorrow you'll learn how they slept through 12-hour nights without ever waking up cold. Darkness falls early and fast in a winter like this. The last light vanishes behind a low ridge of white, and before you even finish your meal, the stars are already spilling across the sky. Not that you see them clearly from inside the teepee. Tonight, the smoke flaps are half drawn, the fire is low and steady, and the hides are pulled snug. Outside, the wind is rising again, but you're not thinking about the storm. You're thinking about sleep. And not just the kind of sleep you get on a couch with a blanket half slipped off, but the kind that makes it through a 12-hour sub-zero night without a single shiver. That's what you're about to experience. You stretch out near the back of the teepee, away from the doorway, where the floor is layered thick with furs and mats. This spot is usually reserved for the family elder or guests, not because it's fancy, but because it's warmest. Heat rises and circles inward toward the rear. Closer to the fire is warmer, yes, but also smokier and busier. Back here it's quiet, protected. You curl into your sleeping robe and the cold doesn't follow. Let's start with the obvious. There are no blankets here, not in the modern sense. What you have instead is a genius system of natural insulation. Beds made from buffalo hides stacked, fur side up, each one trapping warmth and cushioning the ground chill. Beneath that is a layer of woven grass or pine boughs, sometimes both, insulating from the frozen earth. Above you, another robe, another hide, sometimes even two if it's a deep winter night, and sometimes, yes, people sleep in their clothes, but more often than not they sleep without them, because the insulation works better skin to skin. And that brings us to one of the best kept secrets of winter teepee life. Communal sleeping wasn't just tradition, it was insulation. You sleep in a cluster, family packed together like puzzle pieces, sharing heat without even realizing it. Children snuggled between parents, grandparents on the edges, always half awake, listening to the fire, watching the smoke. Body heat isn't wasted, it's harnessed. You're not just surviving the cold, you're cancelling it, one shared breath at a time. Here's a historical detail worth knowing. Some families built raised sleeping platforms along the back wall of the teepee, especially in more permanent winter camps. These platforms were packed with insulation, covered in hides, and elevated just enough to avoid the coldest air pooling near the ground. They also offered a slight social hierarchy. Sleeping higher was warmer, and usually reserved for elders, new mothers, or important guests. You hear a low rustle as someone else shifts nearby. Maybe a child rolling in their sleep, or someone adjusting the flap at the door to block a stray breeze. The fire pops once, sending a soft flicker up the walls. The air smells of wood smoke, hide, and a hint of cooked root. Your body's already relaxing, warmth seeping into your bones. And here's something a little quirky. Some people swore by heated. Stones wrapped in hide, tucked under sleeping mats or near the feet. Pulled from the fire before bed and sealed in layers of cloth or fur, they radiated heat for hours. Old school hot water bottles with none of the plastic. Kids especially loved them. They were handed down with a kind of sleepy reverence, like a bedtime gift. Here, hold this. Don't burn your toes. As for the cold, it's always there. It never fully leaves. But the trick isn't to eliminate it. It's to build barriers against it. The teepee, the hides, the snowbank, the fire, your body heat, your neighbours, every element is a layer. And those layers are enough. Now, you might think the biggest threat to sleep in a teepee is temperature, but sometimes it's the fire itself. A poorly managed flame can smoulder too much, smoke the space out, or worse, spark. That's why one adult always sleeps closest to the fire, light enough to wake at the first pop or shift. It's not a formal rule, it's just something people do, firekeeper by instinct. Some scholars have debated how people slept through such long winter nights, without central heating or thick modern bedding. Could they really stay warm for 12 hours? But first-person accounts, often written by white traders who stayed with plains tribes during winter, Tell a clear story. Yes, they were warm, sometimes even too warm. More than one visitor wrote about stripping down inside the teepee, surprised by how cosy it was after a long day outside in the wind. But not everyone agrees. There's still pushback from certain corners that claim the fire alone couldn't create enough warmth. They forget the design, the hide walls, the low ceiling, the airflow control, the compact sleeping arrangements. This isn't your drafty cabin with holes in the floorboards. This is a system that's been perfected across centuries. A form built not with nails and insulation, but with experience. You drift now. The teepee around you becomes less a structure and more a cocoon. The fire glows gently. The hides above you are heavy, comforting. Your breath fogs slightly, but it's not cold, just cool. You feel your muscles release, your mind slow, your toes finally warm for the first time in days. And you realise something strange. You're not thinking about the temperature anymore. You're just sleeping, like everyone else in here, like people have done on this land for generations. Tomorrow you'll crawl back into that wind to gather food or wood or water. You'll feel the snap of cold on your skin again. But tonight, you're wrapped in a tradition of survival so thorough, so brilliantly constructed, that the blizzard raging outside might as well be happening in another world. And when morning comes, you'll rise into a new kind of cold, the kind you now know how to beat. Dawn comes like a whisper, pale, slow, and a little reluctant. The teepee is dim, but not cold, not really. The fire has burned low again, but the packed snow, all around the base, still holds in enough warmth that your breath doesn't fog heavily in the air. You blink awake beneath a layer of buffalo robes, surrounded by the steady breathing of others. Somewhere near the fire pit, someone stirs. The adult closest to the coals reaches out with practiced ease and nudges them to life, adding chips of dry wood until the faint crackle of flame returns. You push back your covers and stretch. Your body's stiff but not frozen. That's saying something in a place where the outside world is still clawing at 20 Poniesastas. One of the children rolls over, their braid tangled, a foot sticking out from under a hide. Someone chuckles quietly, pulls the robe back over them. The rhythm of waking is slow, deliberate. You don't rush mornings out here, you warm into them, and the first step in that process, like clockwork, is unsealing the entry flap. It's a simple thing, this doorway. Just a curved slit in the buffalo hide, cut low, sometimes reinforced with stitching, or a simple frame of flexible willow branches. But it's also one of the most important pieces of the entire tipi system, because in a world this cold, that flap is either your lifeline or your downfall. You shuffle forward and unlatch the rawhide peg, securing the entrance closed. As you peel back the flap, the cold hits you like a slap of ice. It rushes in low, like it knows its place, and you instinctively pull the robe tighter around your shoulders. Outside, the snow is hard and crusted with an icy sheen. The wind has calmed for now, but the chill still creeps in fast. You hold the flap open only briefly before slipping through and letting it fall shut behind you. That low entrance isn't just about humility or ceremony, though both play a role in different traditions. It's designed that way because heat rises and cold sinks. So by keeping the door low, only the heaviest, densest cold air sneaks in when you open it, minimizing heat loss. You duck, not to honor the tipi, though it feels like that, but to protect the warmth inside it. You move through the snow, gathering more wood from the communal pile, stamped down and covered to protect it from frost. Your fingers are fast now, used to the cold, but you still tuck the bundle close to your chest as you return, and when you step back inside, you notice it. The warmth hasn't escaped. The air is still cozy, still layered with smoke and sleep, and that gentle earthy scent of hide and fire. Entry flaps vary from teepee to teepee. Some are simple slits cut vertically, tied closed with bone toggles or rawhide loops. Others are more complex, with overlapping panels, or even secondary covers in deep winter, a door for your door, like a snow vestibule. And while you might assume everyone enters and exits the same way, here's a quirky twist. In some tribes, it was customary to always enter to the left and walk clockwise inside the teepee. Not for convenience, but for spiritual alignment, mirroring the path of the sun and the cycle of life. Sit on the wrong side and you might just get side-eyed by a grandmother who's seen 100 winters. Now, let's talk about draft management, because this isn't just about the door, it's about how the whole space breathes. The entrance flap, smoke hole, and even the inner lining all work together like a living ventilation system. When the door is opened, cold air spills in, but that air gets immediately pulled toward the centre of the teepee, drawn up by the fire's convection current and pushed out through the smoke hole above. If everything's set right, the cold never settles. It's carried up and out, as if the teepee itself is exhaling it. Some anthropologists have argued that this whole design was too simple to be intentional, that it just worked by luck. But anyone who's ever lived in one of these homes knows better. The entry flap isn't just a flap, it's an airlock, a filter, a temperature regulator. You don't slam it open, you don't leave it flapping in the wind. You treat it like the front line of a very important battle, the one between you and the elements. Back inside, breakfast is already underway. The stew from last night has been reheated, thick and fragrant. Someone passes around chunks of dried meat softened in broth. A girl ladles tea into a small wooden cup. The firelight flickers across the hide walls, and the cold at the doorway is just a memory. You glance at the flap. It hangs back in place now, secured again with a peg. Snow has blown lightly against the outside, forming a lip at the bottom. It won't stop you from leaving, but it slows the wind's rush. A little buffer, a reminder. Every piece of this structure has a role to play, even the humble flap you crawl through on your knees. Later, someone emerges from a neighbouring teepee carrying an extra cover. Another hide, thick and stiff, smoked until golden. They're adding it to the doorway, layering it on the outside like a winter jacket. Not every family has the luxury of a second door layer, but when they do, it's a game changer. It acts like a vestibule in a modern building, catching wind, trapping snow, and giving you one more shield against the relentless cold. There's still a small amount of debate among historians about how common these double-door setups were. Some believe they were widespread in northern tribes. Others think they were improvised based on resources and conditions. But even without a second flap, the teepee's entrance is remarkably effective. It might be just a slit of hide and a peg, but when paired with everything else, the snowbank base, the fire, the smoke hole, it helps maintain an internal climate that could feel, on the best days, downright comfortable. You settle back into your spot near the fire, feet warming again. Outside, it's a frozen world. Inside, it's a quiet sanctuary. And all that separates the two? A humble flap of hide tied just so, holding back the storm. Tomorrow we'll shift from structure to spirit, and spend a day living the rhythms of family life in this snowbound cone. Inside the teepee, the hours pass without clocks, no buzzers, no digital reminders, just the rhythm of the fire, the hiss of snow melting in a pot, and the soft murmur of voices rising and falling like breath. In this warm, hide-wrapped space, time isn't something you fight. It flows around you, pulling you gently along. The day begins slowly. There's no rush, no cold commute or ticking alarm. Someone pokes the fire back to life, someone else pours warm broth into a cup. Children stir, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and the little space starts to buzz, quietly, but with purpose. Morning in a teepee doesn't begin with noise, it begins with movement. Let's talk about what it's really like to live in a teepee full time, not just survive, but live. At 29 dengs, with family, with routine, with everything you own within arm's reach. And yes, let's just get it out of the way now. It's tight in here. Even a large teepee, say 20 to 25 feet in diameter, feels smaller when it's shared by 6 or 7 people, all layered in winter gear, plus storage, food, bedding and firewood. But the space isn't chaotic, it's choreographed. Every person knows where to sit, where to sleep, and where to not step. There's a flow, part cultural, part logistical, that keeps this place from becoming a pile of elbows and spilled soup. You'll notice the floor plan follows a circle, just like the teepee itself. The fire is at the centre, always. Around it, arranged with quiet precision, are the sleeping areas, food bundles, tools and storage. To the left of the entrance traditionally is the men's side, where weapons, hunting gear and sacred items might be kept. To the right, the women's side, often busier and more complex, blankets, food supplies, tools for sewing and preparing hides and cooking essentials. The rear of the teepee, the farthest point from the door, is reserved for guests or elders. That's where you've been sleeping, remember? So try not to snore. Throughout the day, the fire becomes a hub, not just for warmth, but for everything. Food is prepared here, stories are told here, beads are strung, hides are scraped, babies are rocked, and jokes are traded, all around that fire. It's not just heat, it's connection. You find yourself leaning toward it without thinking, not just to warm your hands, but because that's where life gathers. Here's a historical fact that might surprise you. Tipis were cleaned and swept regularly, even in deep winter. Not just out of habit, but out of necessity. Ash builds up. Food scraps attract animals. Hair and fur clump together. So every few days, someone takes a bundle of straw or a soft bristle brush made from roots and sweeps the floor clean, carefully working around the fire pit and sleeping areas. Trash is burned, bones discarded, snow packed down outside the entrance to keep it clear. Children have their roles too. At 6 or 7, they already know how to gather wood, carry snow for melting, or help patch the lining with strips of rawhide. They know not to run across the teepee's interior, and definitely not to knock over the fire. And yes, sometimes they do it anyway. But when they do, they get that look. The kind that comes from a woman who's seen more winters than your fingers can count. One of the quirkier realities of daily life in a tipi. You're never really alone. There's no back room, no side hallway. Every yawn, every conversation, every restless leg twitch is shared. Privacy here isn't about silence, it's about respect. You learn to lower your voice, to tune out background noise, to let people exist beside you without comment. Need to step out for a moment of quiet? Great. Go enjoy the wind and the snow. Just be back before your toes go numb. Now, some anthropologists have debated just how much time was spent inside the teepee during these brutal winters. Were they truly lived in full time, or just used as shelter at night while daily life continued outside? The answer seems to be both. Yes, there were always outdoor chores, firewood to gather, snow to melt, meat to cut, hides to prepare. But in the depths of winter, when storms made travel dangerous, life shifted indoors. Teepees became workshops, kitchens, nurseries, and story houses all at once. And inside that cocoon of hide and firelight, culture didn't pause, it flourished. Elders told stories, long ones that curved and wandered like the paths of migrating buffalo. Songs were sung, sometimes just to pass time, sometimes to remember those who had passed. Beading was done, intricate and slow, as hands stayed busy and ears stayed open. And laughter, plenty of that too. Even at 29°C, people still cracked jokes, often at your expense if you tripped over a sleeping dog or spilled a ladle of stew. You sit back and watch the rhythm unfold. A woman slices dried meat with a flint blade, her motions smooth and practiced. A boy scrapes snow off a piece of wood brought in for the fire. A baby sleeps tucked in a cradle board near the wall, its breath rising in tiny clouds. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is frantic. But everything happens. This isn't some romantic vision of a noble past. This is just family, surviving together, living together. Every once in a while, someone opens the entry flap and lets in a burst of frigid air. Everyone flinches. Someone shouts, "Close it!" The flap falls back, the cold vanishes and the murmuring resumes. The teepee breathes. By late afternoon, the air outside has already begun to dim again. A stew simmers over the fire, bison meat, wild onions, something rooty you can't identify. It smells earthy and rich. Bowls are passed around. No one asks if you're hungry. That's a given. You eat quietly and the world slows. Tomorrow, a storm is expected. You might be stuck inside all day. And yet, no one seems worried. Because inside this cone of hide and history, life doesn't stop when the snow falls harder. It just adjusts, shifts, carries on. And somehow, in the centre of a landscape that wants to kill you, you feel deeply, quietly at home. Snow doesn't knock. It doesn't announce itself with a grand entrance or some dramatic thunderclap. It just arrives, silent, steady, and absolute. You wake in the middle of the night to a soundless world. The fire's glow flickers faintly on the hide walls, and even before someone cracks open the door flap to check, you already know the storm is here. It's not violent exactly. This isn't a tornado or a blizzard with screaming winds. It's slower, heavier. Snow falls like a thick curtain drawn over the prairie, burying everything with quiet determination. The wind moans sometimes, rising and dipping like a morning song, and the tipi creaks faintly as it shifts against the pressure. But inside it holds. This is what the tipi was built for. Not just regular cold, but uninvited, unrelenting weather. Days when the sky won't clear, when the snow stacks up past your knees, when the door flap freezes stiff and wood runs low. You don't fight storms like this, you outlast them. Someone stirs the fire while others slowly wake. You're wrapped deep in buffalo robes again, the air just cool enough to make you appreciate the heat when it reaches you. The snowbank around the base of the tipi is holding strong, and it's doing its job, keeping the wind out and the warmth in. The fire breathes upward, smoke drawn steadily through the smoke hole, which has been narrowed slightly to keep snow from sifting in. The first job of the morning is survival math. How much wood is left? How many days will this storm last? Is there enough dried meat? Enough water? Or snow clean enough to melt? Everyone checks, not in panic but with method. Storms are part of the rhythm. You prepare before they hit, not during. Here's a key historical detail. Winter storms on the plains could last days, even weeks, depending on the year and the region. Some tribes deliberately chose sheltered valleys or wooded ridges for their winter camps, not just for protection from wind but also for nearby resources. Trees for fuel, frozen creeks for water, and terrain that could break a storm's intensity. The tipi was portable, yes, but winter required some degree of rooted patience. You pass the time like everyone else, working where you can, sitting when there's nothing to do, and sharing the space with quiet respect. The fire becomes the centre of gravity. Meals are cooked over it, stories are told around it, and boots are dried near it. Every log burned is a calculation. Use too much, and you'll run short. Use too little, and the cold creeps in. There's a quirky little strategy you notice being used today: snow drying. Someone lays damp hides and wet moccasins not directly near the fire, but just inside the snowbanked base of the tipi. Why? Because frozen snow slowly pulls moisture from items without soaking them or overheating the leather. It's a balance. Cold enough to freeze the water out, warm enough not to stiffen the materials too far. You watch as mittens are rotated, boots propped, and a fur robe flipped end over end with mechanical rhythm. Dry gear, after all, is survival. The kids, somehow, don't seem to mind the storm. They treat it like a game, darting out in pairs to chase snowflakes, returning with hair dusted white and cheeks red. Laughter echoes through the tipi walls, muffled but clear. One of the adults pretends to scold them, but you can see the smile. Let them burn off energy now. They'll be trapped indoors soon enough. By midday, the storm thickens. The snow piles high against the entry flap, so someone grabs a scraper and cuts a path. It's not much, a narrow trench, just enough to let air in, and a person out if needed. The wind tries to push its way inside, but the snowbank and flap arrangement hold steady. The interior stays warm, dim, but warm. Let's talk about that light for a second. In a winter storm, with snow piled high and the smoke flaps drawn close, the tipi becomes a cave of orange and gold. The fire is your only lamp, casting soft shadows that dance along the walls. You notice how the smoke darkens the upper hide, a smudge of soot that tells a story of hundreds of fires before this one. Some tipis grow darker over time, the upper interior walls turning sepia with memory. No one minds. It's the mark of use, of life lived close to the flame. Now here's a debate that comes up in academic circles. How did families handle extreme storms without modern insulation or weatherproofing? Some researchers argue that people simply moved to more permanent shelters in winter, earth lodges, bark houses, or cabins. Others believe that the winter-adapted tipi, with its snowbanks, inner linings, and precise smoke management, was perfectly suited to even the harshest conditions. The truth, likely, lies in the middle. Flexibility was key. If snow was too deep or wind too brutal, people adjusted, sometimes staying longer in one place, sometimes creating hybrid shelters using snow walls or partial underground pits. Inside your tipi now, the world shrinks. The storm cuts you off from the larger prairie, from other camps, even from the nearest water source. But no one panics. This kind of isolation is expected, respected even. You eat, you talk, you sleep, you wait, and waiting isn't wasted time. During storms like this, knowledge gets passed down. An elder might tell a story about a winter worse than this one, when buffalo was scarce and they had to boil bark to survive. A woman sews while explaining how to patch a hide without pulling too tight. Children sit wide-eyed as someone describes the frost spirit who sneaks under teepee flaps when people forget to bank the fire properly. Scary? Maybe. Educational? Absolutely. You sit listening, the storm outside a constant hush. It's like being inside a drum, the snow insulating every sound, the wind a steady background hum. You feel safe, not because the storm has weakened, but because you've prepared. This place, this structure, this group, none of it is accidental. Every stitch of hide, every packed bit of snow, every flicker of flame has one purpose: to carry you through nights like this. And it's working. Tonight, the storm might howl. The wind might pull at the flaps and rattle the poles, but you won't shiver, you won't fear. You'll sleep in the warm curve of a home that has weathered 1,000 winters. Tomorrow we'll talk about the rules, unspoken but ironclad, that keep a teepee from becoming chaos when everyone's snowed in together. After 3 days of being snowed in with the same people, in the same 20-foot circle of buffalo hide, with no doors, no personal rooms, and no just going for a walk to clear my head, you start to understand something very, very important. Etiquette is survival, not just for comfort, but for sanity. When the world is locked in ice, and you're living elbow to elbow with your entire family, plus the occasional neighbour or wandering uncle, how you act inside the teepee can determine whether everyone gets through winter peacefully, or starts casually plotting your exile. These aren't written rules. You won't find them carved into a pole or painted on a hide. But they exist, clear as snowlight, and they're followed with the same seriousness as any survival skill. Because in a space this small and sacred, manners aren't fluff, they're strategy. Let's start with the fire, the heart of everything. Never step over it, never. It might seem harmless if there's no flame at the moment, but stepping over the fire is like stepping over someone's bed, kitchen and prayer rug all at once. It's disrespectful, dangerous, and a surefire way to earn glares sharper than obsidian knives. You walk around the fire, always, moving in a clockwise direction. It's not just habit, it's rhythm, like the sun, like the seasons. Then there's sitting. You don't just plop yourself down wherever. The teepee is a circle, and circles have order. As mentioned before, different areas carry different associations. The west side, opposite the entrance, is reserved for elders, guests, or the person of highest respect. You don't just stroll in and claim that spot because it looks comfy. Even children know better. You take the place you've earned, not the one closest to the fire. Privacy, though a rare commodity, is still granted in subtle ways. People lower their voices when others sleep. They face away when someone changes clothes under a robe. Conversations flow in quiet currents, not sharp waves. You'll rarely hear shouting inside a teepee unless something's gone very wrong. Even arguments, when they happen, are kept contained, softened by layers of patience. There's no room here for pettiness to fester, and no backroom to storm off to. Here's a historical fact that surprises many outsiders. There were codes of conduct for entering and exiting the teepee, and they were followed rigorously. You announce yourself with a cough or a polite call before lifting the flap. Never barge in uninvited. You wait for acknowledgement. Even if it's 30 and your eyelashes are freezing solid, you don't storm into someone's home like a wind gust in human form. That flap may look simple, but crossing it without respect is crossing a line. Once inside, you remove snow from your clothes, shake off your moccasins, and move quickly to your place. There's no standing around, dripping slush, or blocking the entrance. If the storm is raging, the person by the door might help you tuck the flap back quickly, sealing the cold out again. Then you sit, quietly, gratefully, and you wait for someone to hand you something warm. One of the more endearing quirks of teepee etiquette is the communal silence that follows meals. After the eating is done, people lean back, hands on full stomachs, and let the quiet settle like snow. Not from discomfort, but from satisfaction. The fire crackles, someone might hum, a dog might snore, but mostly there's peace. This moment is honoured, not filled. Now you might be wondering, what happens when things do go wrong? When someone does step over the fire, or takes the elder's spot, or keeps talking when people are clearly trying to sleep? Well, usually nothing explosive. There's no dramatic punishment, just correction. A quiet word, a subtle shift, maybe a gentle joke that cuts just deep enough to sting but not enough to leave a scar. People are expected to learn quickly. If they don't, they're reminded. If they still don't, well, they might find themselves invited to visit a different tipi for a while. But not everything is strict. In fact, humour is a huge part of tipi etiquette, especially during long winters. It's used to correct, to bond, to diffuse tension. An elder might joke that the newcomer snores louder than the fire crackles. A mother might tease her son for pretending he forgot how to chop wood when it's cold out. Laughter makes the walls feel wider, the roof taller. It lets the pressure out before things boil. Anthropologists have long debated the role of gender and hierarchy inside the tipi, especially during winter when roles blur slightly. While certain duties traditionally fall along gender lines, men hunting, women managing the home, in the winter lodge, things get more fluid. If a man can sew, he sews. If a woman is strong enough to split wood, she does. Everyone contributes, everyone adapts. And when a storm keeps you indoors for days, the strictest rule of all becomes, don't be useless. Here's a quirky little rule you wouldn't expect. Never sit with your feet toward the fire. It's not just about courtesy, it's practical. Sticking your feet too close means others get your boots in their face, your toes near their stew. Plus, it blocks the circle. So you curl up with your side to the flames or tuck your feet beneath you. Little things, big meaning. You start to notice how much is communicated with glances, shrugs, and quiet shifts. Someone handing you their spot closer to the fire isn't just being nice, it's a gesture of care. Someone offering the last scrap of dried meat to the youngest isn't an accident, it's tradition. In this space, where everyone sees everything, your actions speak louder than your words, especially when it's 20 degrees and kindness is one of the few things that burns without smoke. By the end of the day, the storm hasn't let up, but no one's restless. The fire is steady. The space, though small, feels big enough. Everyone knows their part, their place, their pace. And even though the wind keeps clawing at the sides of the tipi, the warmth inside holds. Not just the fire, the people, the rules, the respect. You don't survive winters like this alone, and you definitely don't survive them by acting like it's your living room. Tomorrow the snow might stop, the door will open wider, but tonight you'll fall asleep in a world where every breath, every gesture, every shared space means something. And you'll know the most important rule of all. Don't forget to pass the ladle clockwise. The snow stops in the middle of the night, but you don't know that yet. You're still asleep beneath your buffalo robe, warm and curled like a cinnamon roll, while the storm finally winds down outside. By dawn, it's gone completely. No wind, no falling flakes, just a heavy stillness that makes the world feel padded and quiet. When someone finally opens the door flap to peek out, a shaft of pale light cuts through this tipi like a soft knife. And there it is, the storm's gift, an unbroken sea of white stretching in every direction. And now, it's time to move again. Not move camp, at least not yet. But movement is life, even in winter. Wood has to be gathered. Game needs tracking, trade items delivered, people to check on, and that means stepping back into the world outside the hide walls. It means frozen trails and dog power. You bundle up slowly. First, a base layer, soft, smoke-scented buckskin, then leggings, fur-lined moccasins high and stiff from yesterday's drying, a long, thick robe, likely bison or deer, tied tight with a braided sash, a hood or fur-lined cap pulled low, gloves that make your fingers feel clumsy but necessary. Every piece matters. You've learned by now, there's no just running out real quick when it's this cold. Exposure doesn't take breaks. Outside, the camp looks transformed. The snow is piled thigh-high in places drifted by the storm, sculpted into soft ridges and valleys. Teepees rise from it like snow-covered cones, their tops dark with soot, smoke drifting lazily into a sky so clear it hurts your eyes. The air is unbelievably crisp. One inhale burns your nose and makes you cough. Your eyelashes try to freeze together almost instantly. But the dogs? The dogs are thrilled. Lean, long-legged and fur-coated like little wolves, they bark and wag and run in circles as preparations begin. Before horses returned to the plains in the 1700s, dogs were the main beasts of burden, and even afterward, in winter conditions too brutal for hoofed animals, dogs remained the go-to choice. They're tough, nimble, born for this. You watch as a travois is pulled from its resting place, a simple sled made of 2 long poles, lashed into a V-shape with a cross platform between them. The poles are harnessed to a dog's back via a padded yoke, letting the ends drag behind in the snow. It's not high-tech, but it's brilliant. And it works. Supplies, bundles of wood, or even a child too small to walk far, all get strapped in and pulled with surprising ease. Here's a historical detail worth remembering. A single dog with a travois could pull about 75 pounds over snow and ice, more if the terrain was flat and the snow crusted. Most families had several dogs, all trained, all expected to earn their keep. They weren't pets, not in the modern sense, but they were respected, named, trusted. And in weather like this, sometimes they were the only reason you got back home at all. You step out with one of the older boys and 2 others. The goal today? Wood. The storm took down several small trees and scattered limbs. Gifts from the wind if you know where to look. You carry a small axe, a bone-bladed knife, and your snow-hardened patience. The dog pulls the travois behind you, tail wagging, tongue lolling, not even pretending to be cold. The trail out of camp is narrow, just a single file line carved by feet and paws. Step off it, and the snow swallows your leg. Stay on it, and you glide. Sort of. It's still work, but it's work with rhythm. The landscape is hushed. Trees stand like ghosts in the distance, their branches thick with snow. Animal tracks cross the trail. Rabbit, fox, maybe even wolf. You learn quickly to read the signs. A fresh track? Recent? Crusted edges? Old. The boy with you points at some faint depressions in the snow and murmurs something about elk. Too far to chase today, but good to know for later. Everything here is information. As you reach the edge of a wooded draw, you start gathering. Not randomly. Dry branches only, ones cracked off in the storm or already lying broken. Wet wood is useless unless burned right away. You stack them neatly on the travois. When it's full, you lash the load down with rawhide cord and start back. The dog leans into the weight, paws finding traction on the trail. You follow, legs burning, nose dripping, fingers stiff but proud. And here's a quirky little fact. Some winter travellers greased their cheeks with animal fat to prevent frostbite. It worked. Kind of gross, definitely effective. Today you notice someone else returning to camp with a shiny face and a big grin. Must have been a long trip, or maybe just cold enough to risk it. Now, let's pause on something scholars still debate. Were dogs used more than horses in winter travel, even after the spread of the horse across the plains? Some argue that horses were preferred whenever possible, even in snow. Others insist dogs remained vital in deep snow and wooded terrain, where hooves slipped and sleds failed. The evidence leans toward flexibility. Use the animal that works best for the land and the moment. But no one denies the central role dogs played in cold weather logistics. Back in camp, you return to the tipi and unload the wood bundle. It's immediately sorted. Dry pieces stacked near the fire, smaller ones placed near the edge of the tipi to continue drying in the ambient warmth. Someone gives the dog a scrap of meat. Another child wipes snow from its paws. A working partner, paid in food and praise. Later in the day, another group heads out, this time with trading bundles. A nearby camp is a few hours away, and messages need delivering. Gifts too. Maybe meat in exchange for herbs. Maybe a carved tool traded for dried berries. The dogs are loaded again. The travellers wrap their robes tighter. The snow has stopped, yes, but the cold. The cold is eternal. You sit outside the tipi now, bundled deep, watching smoke rise across the camp like signals. It's quiet, but alive. People moving, dogs pulling, snow crunching. Even in stillness, life pulses beneath the surface. This isn't survival in the rugged cinematic sense. It's not about bold stares into blizzards or epic declarations of defiance. It's more practical than that, more enduring. It's a child tightening a harness with frozen fingers, a woman adjusting a dog's paw wrap so it doesn't limp tomorrow, a man choosing which trail will give him the least resistance. No drama, just knowledge in motion. Tomorrow you'll sit inside again, watch the children play, and wonder how joy exists at 29 to see. The sun sits low, never rising too high during these deep winter days, as if it knows not to overpromise. But even its weak light makes the snow sparkle like crushed glass, and the camp seems to breathe easier now that the storm has passed. Inside the tipi, Breakfast has been eaten, boots dried, flaps opened a little to let in some light. Adults are working. Someone's repairing a pafleche, someone else is sharpening tools. But the real noise is coming from outside, where the kids are losing their minds in the snow. At 20 Schelms, you watch through the doorway, cup of warm tea in hand, as a group of children runs past, barely bundled compared to the cautious layers you've learned to wear, their robes flapping open, moccasins kicking up sprays of powder, cheeks flushed like apples about to split from the cold, and they are laughing, loudly. Like the weather isn't trying to kill them, they build forts, dig, into snowbanks, throw snowballs that pack hard and fly far. They slide on their bellies down drifts like seals, roll in the powder, wrestle, shriek, tumble. One tries to stand on a frozen stump and slips, landing on his back with a spectacular whump. The others fall over laughing. He's fine, gets up, does it again. And you just stand there mystified. How is this normal? Here's the thing you realise fast. Kids in the Tipi world don't fear winter. They're trained to respect it, sure, but it doesn't lock them inside or smother them in warnings. It's a playground. Cold is a condition, not a punishment. The key is preparation and constant movement. Don't stop moving, and you won't freeze. Take their clothing, for instance. Those moccasins, lined with fur, layered with grass or moss for insulation. The outer robes, bison hide, soft side in, fur side out. Not thin modern parkas or puffy synthetics, but thick handmade coats that weigh more than some of the kids themselves. And underneath, smoke-tanned leggings and shirts that breathe but block wind. Smart layering, no sweat. Literally. Sweat is the enemy in this cold. It freezes fast and becomes a wet blanket of misery. Older kids know this instinctively. They pace themselves, peel off layers when needed, shift gear around. Younger ones are still learning. You see a little girl getting her mittens tugged back on by her brother, who scolds her with the same tone their mother used earlier. Then he tightens the fur sash around her waist, checks her boots, and sends her running again. He doesn't ask her to sit still. He makes sure she can keep playing safely. Here's a historical fact that might catch you off guard. Plains tribes had winter-specific games, designed not just for fun but for training. Snow snake competitions involved sliding polished sticks across frozen ground to see whose went farthest, teaching aim, strength and coordination. There were snowshoe races in deeper snow regions, cooperative sled-pulling games, and even snowball accuracy contests that doubled as prep for throwing weapons. It wasn't just play, it was preparation disguised as joy. You step outside for a closer look, and the cold hits you like a wall, but the energy in the air keeps it from settling in your bones. The kids are in their own world. Some are building something, a lean-to of snow and branches, perhaps trying to copy the adults' shelter. Others have turned a snowdrift into a stage, and are shouting what might be a play or a story, complete with dramatic falls and heroic poses. And then, the unexpected. A snowball flies through the air and lands squarely on your chest. A moment of silence, then laughter. Yours and theirs. You've been invited. You pick up a handful of snow, pack it and send it flying. It misses by a mile. Still, the game is on. Suddenly you're dodging, ducking, pretending to be stealthy while stomping through knee-deep drifts. Your face aches from grinning. Your fingers go numb and you don't care. You're warm in the only way that matters out here. In the core of your chest, from the spark of play that refuses to be buried, even by winter. Back at the teepee later, you peel off layers, cheeks raw, clothes damp with snow but not sweat. Someone hands you a hot drink. Someone else laughs at your snow-soaked hair. The kids file in behind you still buzzing. Someone's mitten is missing. Someone else has a gash in their robe. The repairs can wait. For now, they're heroes returning from an epic battle made entirely of snow. Here's a quirky fact. Children were taught to observe weather changes as part of play, not in a structured, let's do a lesson kind of way, but naturally through experience. They noticed how snow shifted when the wind changed, how birds moved differently before a new storm, how tracks in the snow melted or stayed. Adults ask questions. What direction was the wind this morning? Did the creak sound louder or softer? Learning didn't come from lectures. It came from playing in the world until it spoke back. Now, let's talk about something anthropologists love to debate. How free were children in nomadic winter camps? Some early accounts painted them as miniature adults, forced into work and responsibility from toddlerhood. Others portrayed an overly romantic image of total freedom. But the truth? A balance. Kids were given space to explore, fail, and discover, but within a framework of expectations. You play hard, but you also help. You laugh, but you also listen. You can be wild, as long as you know when to be wise. The teepee's warm again now. The fire has been stoked. The children are gathered, wrapped in furs, sipping broth, cheeks flushed with cold and joy. An elder begins a story, and the room stills. You lean back, fingers finally regaining feeling, and realise something simple but profound. Joy survives the winter. It doesn't come from comfort. It comes from resilience made playful, from a culture that teaches children not just how to endure, but how to live fully, even in a frozen world. Tomorrow you'll hear how winter shapes the soul, not just the skin, how cold becomes a teacher, not just an enemy. But tonight, rest easy. Your legs are sore, your lungs full, and your inner child, very much awake. It's after dark again, though you'd barely know it. Winter night falls before you've finished digesting dinner. Inside the teepee, the fire burns low, its glow painting the hide walls with flickering amber shadows. Outside, the cold has sharpened, the kind that turns breath to frost mid-air and makes the snow creak under its own weight. But in here, a different kind of warmth is building. Not just from the fire, but from the voices. Tonight, there's no game, no work, no errands. Tonight is for something older, something deeper. Tonight is for rites of cold and spirit. You sit cross-legged on the fur-covered floor, the fire crackling in its shallow pit. The air is thick with sage smoke, sharp and earthy, mixed with the softer scent of smouldering sweetgrass. Someone tosses another pinch into the fire. The flames flare, the smell intensifies, and suddenly the space feels heavier. Not physically, spiritually, like the very air has remembered something sacred. An elder begins to speak. Their voice isn't loud, but it carries, settling over the room like a blanket. They tell of winter spirits, of ancestors who walk beside the living when the snow is deep and the nights long. You've heard pieces of these stories before, but never like this, not in this tone, not with this kind of hush around the room. The children stop fidgeting, the adults stop sewing, even the dogs curl up and go still. The fire pops, the story winds on. Here's a historical fact you might not expect. Many plains tribes held winter as the season of stories and ceremonies, not just out of tradition, but out of practicality. In summer there was too much to do, hunting, gathering, moving camp. But in winter, when everything slowed, when the world grew quiet and death felt near, the old stories had space to rise. It was believed that certain teachings, especially spiritual ones, could only be told when snow blanketed the earth, when the world itself was listening. Tonight the story is about a hunter who gets lost in a whiteout and is guided home by the spirit of his grandmother, her form appearing in the flicker of the firelight. Another tale follows, this one about a child who disrespected the wind and was carried away, only to return with frostbitten fingers and a lesson etched in pain. The stories aren't just spooky, they're instruction wrapped in myth, lessons disguised as legends. You begin to realise that in a world ruled by seasons, cold isn't just a climate, it's a character. One with power, one with rules. The wind howls outside and it almost feels like a cue. The elder smiles but keeps talking. He speaks of a being that lives in the snow, a watcher who visits only in the deep months, entering silently, unseen, to check which homes have forgotten their respect. He doesn't punish, he remembers. That alone is enough to keep people careful. Here's the fringe fact you won't find in every book. Some believed that spirits of the cold could be soothed with music. Drumming, singing, even a whistle at just the right pitch could shift the energy. It wasn't superstition, it was survival psychology. Music changed the emotional temperature of the teepee. When fear crept in, you sang. When hunger hovered too close, you told a story. It wasn't about pretending things were okay, it was about keeping spirit in the room. Someone starts a low drum beat, soft and steady. Another voice rises in song, not loud, but deep. Not performance, but presence. The notes hang in the air like smoke curling into the rafters of the teepee. It doesn't matter if you know the words, you feel them. Everyone does. The children hum, the adults close their eyes, the fire listens. Anthropologists have long debated how much of these winter rituals were formal ceremony versus informal tradition. Was there a priestly class? Were there official rites that only certain members could perform? In some tribes, yes. In others, spiritual leadership was more fluid, more interwoven with daily life. The tipi itself could become a ceremonial space, especially in winter, when going outside to build a sweat lodge or hold a sun dance was impractical. Inside, with fire and smoke and story, the sacred happened just as powerfully. And maybe that's what you feel now. A ceremony without robes or altars, just people, fire, cold, and connection. Someone passes a small bowl of smouldering herbs. You're invited to waft the smoke over yourself, pulling it toward your heart, then your head, then letting it drift upward. It's cleansing, not physically, but emotionally. You feel lighter, less dust sharp around the edges. It's a strange thing, sitting in a circle of people who've survived storms, hunger, grief, and still choose to gather here, night after night, and make space for spirit. Because in a world where the earth tries to freeze you solid, the soul needs tending just as much as the body. And winter presses you to listen. The tipi walls groan gently in a gust of wind, the snow shifting outside. But inside, the flames dance. The elder finishes his story. The drum slows. The bowl of herbs is passed once more, the scent now soft and familiar. The children start to drift off, heads against shoulders, eyes heavy. Someone begins to hum again, low, rhythmic, a lullaby for the soul. You're not sure where the boundary is between song and silence anymore, and that's okay. You're in the middle of something older than translation. You pull your robe tighter, lie back on your bedding, and stare up at the roof of poles converging above. Through the smoke hole, a patch of stars winks down at you. Cold stars, but not unfriendly. Tonight the cold isn't cruel. It's a reminder, a gatekeeper, a teacher, and you've been welcomed into its classroom. Tomorrow you'll take a closer look at the people behind the fire, specifically the women who hold the warmth and the wisdom of this home in their hands. But for now, you sleep with spirit. The day begins, as many do, with the sound of hands working long before the rest of you are fully awake. You stir beneath your robe, the fire already whispering to life again, and someone is moving softly near the centre of the teepee, feeding the flames, boiling water, rearranging logs. You open your eyes and catch a glimpse of her silhouette against the firelight, shawl draped over her shoulders, hair braided tight. She's not rushing. She doesn't need to. This is her domain, and she moves through it with the quiet command of someone who's done this 1,000 times before. You sit up, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and begin to understand what you've been watching all along without really seeing. The women in this tipi are the warmth, literally and figuratively. They hold it, manage it, guard it. In a world where survival depends on the smallest details, how tight a hide is sewn, how dry the firewood is, how well the moccasins were packed overnight. Their labour doesn't just make life easier, it makes it possible. From the outside, tipi life can look like it centres on hunting, on cold endurance, on fires and hides and dogs and storms. But spend any real time inside and you realise the cold is not the story. The warmth is, and that warmth is largely the result of matriarchal intelligence in motion. Here's a historical fact that gets glossed over too often. Among many plains tribes, the tipi belonged to the woman. Literally. She owned it. She built it. She maintained it. It was her space, her authority, her rhythm. The poles might be lifted by the group. The hides shared across families, but once the structure stood, it was hers. A man could not bring a guest inside without her approval. He couldn't rearrange anything without her say. Her hands wove the home. Her rules held it together. You watch now as two women prepare food. One slicing dried meat, the other grinding frozen berries with a stone, mixing them with fat and flour into a heavy high-energy winter cake. The way they move is a conversation. They pass tools without words, stir without instruction, correct children with a glance. The fire, the food, the layers of hide and fur, it all flows through their hands. And this work is not limited to cooking, not even close. Take a look at the robes piled by the sleeping area. Each one hand-stitched, layered for warmth, patched when torn. The stitching isn't decorative, It's functional craftsmanship, designed to hold up through freezing nights and constant use. A poorly made robe isn't just a bad look, it's a health hazard. And who do you think made those stitches? Repaired them by firelight with hands cracked from cold? You already know. Here's something delightfully niche. Some women sewed using bone needles so fine they rival modern surgical tools in delicacy. These weren't disposable or mass-made. They were shaped from long bones, polished with care, and passed down through generations. A good needle was a prized possession, kept in carefully decorated sewing kits that were as personal and unique as any modern-day purse. You watch as a girl, no older than 9 or 10, helps sort a pile of rawhide thongs. She's learning, not just the mechanics, but the quiet etiquette of working around others, the little unspoken rules that govern shared space. She doesn't need a chore chart. She watches, imitates, and is gently corrected by the older women when she strays. Soon, she'll be able to stitch her own robe, manage her own fire, lead her own space. And in some ways, she already is. Let's talk power. Not the political kind, but the domestic kind that controls time and energy. These women decide when the tipi is struck and when it is raised. They handle the packing, the moving, the setting of the hearth. They are the reason the fire never goes out, even during storms. They know how much dried meat is left, how much snow needs melting, how many days they can stay put before supplies thin. Their knowledge is not loud, but it's deeply rooted, and everyone around them moves to its rhythm. Anthropologists have sometimes fumbled when describing the role of women in plains tribes, swinging wildly between romanticizing them as wise earth goddesses or reducing them to background labourers. But neither view holds up when you're sitting right here, in the middle of a winter morning, watching them command the shape of the day without ever raising their voices. And yes, of course, there are gendered roles here. The men still hunt, still make tools, still perform duties that balance the camp's survival needs. But inside the tipi, inside this warm, breathing space, women are the architects of comfort. They're the ones who make winter survivable, not through brute force, but through patient repetition. Every fire lit, every robe repaired, every batch of frozen stew stirred into something nourishing. That's winter victory, one small act at a time. Here's a quirky side note. In some tribes, women would court potential husbands by offering them specially prepared food inside the tipi, a test in a way. Not of his strength or hunting skill, but of his manners, his respect, his way of existing in her space. Marriage wasn't just about attraction. It was about compatibility in tight quarters, in deep cold, with very few luxuries and no escape doors. You smile now, watching one woman lightly scold a man who's tracked snow into the tipi again. She clicks her tongue, waves him out, then quickly resmooths the floor covering and sprinkles a bit of ash to help dry the spot. It takes her less than a minute. The man returns sheepish, brushing snow from his leggings. No one's mad. This is the dance. This is life. By the end of the day, the tipi glows warm again. The food is prepared, the robes are fluffed, the fire burns low and steady, and in the corner, two women work quietly over a new robe, stitching in rhythm, swapping stories in low voices, training the girl beside them with nothing more than a nod. Tomorrow you'll follow the men into the cold, learn how they hunt, scout and strategize at the edge of freezing. But tonight, you know the truth. This home exists because a woman made it, and she will make it again tomorrow, before the sun even hints at rising. Before the children stir or the fire is rekindled, the men are already moving. Quiet, purposeful, half-shadowed figures layered in robes and gear, slipping out of the tipi into the world of blue ice and hard snow. You rise too, slower, less sure. Your body protests after so many days of warmth and rhythm, but today is different. Today, you're heading out with the hunters. The tipi behind you glows faintly, a pool of safety and heat. Ahead, nothing but frozen horizon. The cold slaps your face instantly, sharp, unfiltered, more awake than you are. But no one around you flinches. They're already moving, fast but silent, every step planned. You pull your robe tight and follow, footsteps crunching behind theirs on a barely visible trail. The dogs remain behind this time. This isn't a transport run. This is a hunt. And in winter, Hunting is a gamble played with time, energy, and bone-deep knowledge. The men, brothers, uncles, cousins, aren't just looking for food. They're tracking life through a death-white landscape. They follow signs you wouldn't notice even if you stared at the snow for an hour. A line of depressions in a drift, where snowshoes of a passing animal didn't quite settle. A patch of disturbed frost under a pine tree. The way a ridge breaks the wind just enough to shelter a small herd of deer. You squint and see nothing. They glance and know the entire story. Here's a hard fact. Hunting at 21 tenders is more about energy conservation than excitement. There's no running unless you're already sure. Every movement burns calories you can't spare. You don't chase game blindly. You stalk it slowly, patiently, with absolute certainty. Because if you miss, you might not get another chance for days. One man crouches studying a track. It's old, edges softened by wind but not useless. He signals with a tilt of his chin, and the group moves on. No talking. The cold makes breath visible, and even that can give away your position if you're too close to the herd. So you breathe slowly, evenly. Your nostrils sting. Your lips crack. But you keep going. You stop near a narrow ravine, just low enough to cut the wind. A dusting of snow reveals fresh signs. Scat, prints, a few nipped twigs. They're close. The men spread out in practiced formation, slow, deliberate. You follow one of them, staying low, heart thudding louder than you'd like. Every step is a quiet prayer not to crunch too loud, not to slip, not to spook something before the arrow flies. Then you see them. A small group of deer clustered near a patch of exposed grass. Their breath fogs in the air like steam from a kettle. Their coats are thick and their eyes alert. One lifts its head, ears twitching. The hunter beside you doesn't move. His bow is already drawn. He waits. Breath. Breath. Release. The arrow flies with a sharp hiss and strikes true. The animal stumbles, falls. The others scatter into the trees, gone in a blur of motion. No cheers, no celebration, just a long exhale, a nod. The hunter steps forward, says a few words under his breath. A thanks. A promise. The others approach to help. Here's your historical detail for the day. Successful winter hunts were often the result of group knowledge and spiritual preparation as much as skill. Ceremonies before the hunt were common, offering tobacco, speaking to the spirits of the land, calling upon ancestors to guide the arrows. Some tribes believed the animal offered itself willingly when approached with humility. The kill wasn't about dominance, it was about relationship. You watch as they work quickly, efficiently. The deer is bled, skinned, and quartered with sharp tools. Some made of metal traded long ago, others still stone or bone. Nothing is wasted, not even in winter. The hide will be smoked, the meat dried or stewed, the sinew turned to thread. Even the bones will be used, carved into tools, games, needles. And here's a fringe fact. Some hunters carried tiny carved figures in their pouches, effigies of animals, guardians, or spirit guides. They weren't shown off, weren't talked about, but they were present. Touched before the hunt, a reminder that the cold world wasn't empty, it was watching, listening. You help where you can, carrying a small bundle, brushing snow off gear, trying not to be in the way. The walk back is slower, heavier. The weight of the animal is shared between pairs of men, lashed to poles or carried in travois. The silence remains. Not solemn, just focused. You don't speak until you can see the tipis again in the distance, smoke rising gently against a pale sky. Back in camp, the women emerge to meet the returning group. No one shouts, no one claps. They move in to help unload, to take the meat, to begin the work of processing. The moment is calm, communal. There will be a meal tonight, and maybe even a song. But right now, the work continues. And this is the quiet truth you begin to understand. The men don't hunt for glory. They hunt because hunger has no sympathy, and the cold doesn't wait. Their strength isn't in their arms, it's in their patience, their precision, and their deep, unshakable knowledge of the land. You think about the arrow flying, the silent thanks, the way the snow bore the weight of the animal as it fell. You think about the way no one bragged, no one boasted. The kill wasn't the point. The return was. Tomorrow you'll learn what happens when the cold wins, when no matter how hard you try, the tipi freezes solid. But tonight, you sit by the fire, belly full, body sore, spirit steady. The hunt was successful. The winter, for now, has been held at bay. The first sign that something is wrong isn't the cold, it's the silence. Not the peaceful kind that settles over camp after a fresh snow, but a deeper, pressing stillness. The kind that makes people stop moving mid-task and glance at the sky like it just whispered something ominous. It's the second morning after the hunt, and the cold has shifted. Not in temperature, you're already used to when it is Nistad, but in presence. This cold is different. Not just sharper, heavier, it doesn't just touch your skin, it presses against your ribs. You step outside the teepee and feel it immediately. The air is like shattered glass, dry, crystalline, absolute. Your nostrils freeze shut before your second breath. The teepees, strong and smoke-darkened, now wear a skin of ice. Frost blooms along the lower hides, even where the snowbanks usually protect them. The smoke holes are narrowed, trying to hold in warmth, but the rising smoke stutters, unwilling to climb in this still, heavy air. You retreat inside, fast, but inside isn't much better. The fire is burning, but it's not winning. The breath from the sleepers still puffs out in visible clouds. You kneel near the flames, hands outstretched, but the warmth hovers just inches from the coals, refusing to spread. It's like the cold has decided to move in, to sink through the hides and into the floor, into your clothes, into your bones. You press your palms close to the fire, then to your cheeks. Even the heat feels thin. And this is the part no one really talks about in books. Sometimes the tipi freezes. Not in some catastrophic collapse, not with icicles dangling from the poles or anything cinematic. It just stops working. The warmth that usually holds inside, layered and maintained so carefully, fails to cling. The snowbank around the edge, normally insulation, now seems to be leaching heat. The hide, once softened and breathable, stiffens. You reach out and touch the interior wall. It's dry, brittle, frozen solid. One of the elders sighs, not surprised, just resigned. There's talk now, quiet, but serious. Firewood is being counted, the state of the lining is being checked. Someone moves to pull down the interior hide liner that hangs between the poles and the outer wall. They rub the edge between their hands. It crackles faintly. Even it is losing the battle. Here's a historical fact that doesn't make it into tourist versions of tipi life. In extreme deep cold, even well-constructed tipis became dangerously inefficient. The carefully built insulation systems, the inner lining, the smoke hole control, the snowbank foundation, could only do so much when the temperature dropped below a certain threshold. This wasn't a design flaw. It was physics. At some point, the cold always found a way in. So what now? The answer isn't to panic, it's to adapt. You watch as people begin to double layer the space. Extra robes are hung across the lower walls, creating a secondary interior curtain. Cracks in the floor are patched with fur. Every bed is piled higher with hides. Cooking shifts to smaller pots. Less steam, less moisture to cool the air. And instead of keeping the fire going strong all day, it's now burned in bursts. Hot, intense flares followed by periods of coaling to conserve wood and reduce smoke, which now lingers awkwardly, reluctant to rise. And here's something wild. Some families even sleep in shifts during nights like this. One person stays awake near the fire, stoking it regularly so it never dies. This is the price of survival. You don't get to sleep through a night when it's 35 degrees and the walls are rigid with frost. You pull your robe tighter and help where you can, shake out hides, adjust linings, melt snow to refill the water pouch, even though your hands go numb within seconds of touching the metal pot. Every task is smaller now, slower. You speak less, because breath hangs like fog and makes your face wet. Wetness is a threat. You learn that in this kind of cold, movement is carefully measured. You don't leave the teepee unless you have to. You don't touch anything with bare skin, and you absolutely don't let the firewood run low, not even for a moment. Now here's a fringe fact few people know. Some winter dwellers use small flat stones, heated in the fire and wrapped in cloth, as hand or foot warmers. You see it now. One of the women wraps a heated stone in buckskin and tucks it at the bottom of her child's bedroll. It won't last the night, but it might keep the worst of the cold from creeping in. Small hacks, big difference. As evening comes, the teepee is transformed into a cocoon. A very cold cocoon, but one that still holds life. Everyone is wrapped in layers. There's less conversation, more humming. Stories are replaced by soft singing, almost meditative. You realise that part of this isn't just physical, it's emotional. When the world outside becomes hostile, the inner world contracts, becomes quieter, more inward. A defence mechanism of the spirit. Someone cooks a simple stew, thin but hot. It tastes like relief. The bowl warms your fingers. You sip slowly, feeling the heat move down your throat like sunlight through snow. The fire crackles but doesn't roar. It's not allowed to. Now let's touch on an ongoing academic debate. Why didn't winter lodges evolve into more permanent earth-covered dwellings among all plains groups? Some tribes, like the Mandan and Hidatsa, use semi-subterranean homes in winter, but others continued to rely on tipis, even in the worst cold. The answer likely lies in flexibility, seasonal migration, and deep familiarity with their systems. A well-made tipi could be adjusted, repaired, and transported. A permanent lodge could not. And for many, knowing the cold, not escaping it, was the better survival strategy. You lie down that night wearing almost everything you own. The robe is thick. The fire is low but alive. You tuck your feet close to a warmed stone and close your eyes. The tipi walls are stiff like a drum skin, but they still hold. Not just the heat, but the hope, the determination, the stubborn, proud refusal to let the cold win without a fight. It's not comfort. It's calculated discomfort. The kind that says, we can survive this, not easily, but together. Tomorrow you'll see what happens when spring starts to flirt at the edges of the ice, and the camp begins to think about moving again. But tonight, you sleep inside a frozen tent, and dream warm anyway. When spring finally comes, it doesn't arrive like some grand saviour galloping over the hill. It creeps in, slowly, like a shy guest, not knocking, not speaking, just lingering at the edge of the camp and melting things one quiet patch at a time. You don't even notice it at first. After so many weeks of frost and fire, you've stopped expecting change. But then one morning you step out of the teepee and the snow crunches differently, softer, wetter. Your breath still puffs out like smoke, but your fingers sting less. You hear something odd too, dripping, water, not much, just enough to make your ears twitch. And that's when the conversation begins. Not about weather, but about movement, about when, not if, it's time to leave the winter camp. Because out here, in this vast, breathing land, nothing stays forever. Not even a well-settled teepee, especially not a teepee. You're standing in a camp that's been locked in snow for months, ringed with snowbanks, firewood caches, drying racks, dog trails, the soot-stained canvas of survival. But all of that is temporary, always was, because plains life is motion, and the land has started whispering, it's time. The elders don't rush, no one scrambles, but decisions are being made behind furrowed brows and quiet conversations. People are watching the trees, the sun's angle, the way the creek ice thins near the edges. A little more daylight, a little less wind. That's all it takes to shift the season and the mindset. Here's something to understand. Winter camps were never meant to be permanent. They were stations along a cycle, chosen carefully for protection, food access, and firewood supply. You stayed as long as you needed, and only that long. Staying too late risked flooding from meltwater, rot in the hides, or worse, being caught immobile when hunting should already have resumed. Survival meant knowing when to dig in, and when to pull up the stakes. You see it beginning now. Small tasks at first. Someone checks the condition of the travois poles. Someone else scrapes at the frozen base of a teepee wall, testing how deep the snow has shrunk back. In one tent, a woman begins to repack supplies into rawhide bags. Not panicked, just methodical. Her hands know the order already. This isn't the first move. It won't be the last. And here's your historical fact for this stretch. Tearing down and packing a winter teepee could be done in under an hour, if needed. Everything had its place. The poles were bundled and carried by horses or dogs. The hide covering was rolled, strapped and loaded. Bedding was bundled tightly with sinew cord or rawhide strips. Cooking tools, weapons, toys, everything compact, efficient and mobile. You don't just move a tipi. You fold a life into a transportable bundle. But before you move, you have to read the land. You join one of the scouts heading out today, not to hunt, not to trade, but to look, to listen, to see whether the land is ready. You travel over slushy snow into stands of bare trees where the snowmelt has carved tiny trickles through the earth. Here the south-facing slopes are brown already, tufts of grass pushing up like rebellious green flags. He squats by a patch of ground and brushes the surface gently, not to pick anything, just to feel. Soon, he says, and that's all it takes. Back at camp, the tempo subtly shifts. Fires are still lit, meals are still cooked. But there's a lightness now, like a lid has been cracked open. People laugh more, kids run farther, someone sings while scrubbing a cooking pot, really sings, with melody, not just under their breath. You don't realise how heavy winter has been until spring starts to tug at your sleeves, and in the midst of this, people begin preparing the tipi itself for movement. The snowbank around the base is scraped away, revealing the skirt of hide that had been sealed in place for warmth. It's brittle now, like old parchment, but still strong. The lacing pins are removed. The liner inside is gently folded, dusted, packed. One of the women explains that each tipi has its own way of folding, its own pattern. Her mother taught her, and she's teaching her daughter now. If you fold it wrong, she says with a smile, it won't sleep right when we raise it again. A house, after all, has memory. Here's a fringe fact you wouldn't expect. Some families marked their poles with specific notches or colourings, so they always knew which ones formed the door, the smoke hole, or the rear of the lodge. Poles weren't just sticks, they were positions. A tipi raised in haste with the wrong arrangement wouldn't sit right in the wind, wouldn't breathe properly, might even collapse in a storm. Knowing your poles was knowing your balance. Not everyone is thrilled about the move. Some of the younger kids grumble. They've just gotten comfortable here. And let's be honest, the idea of going anywhere while it's still below freezing at night doesn't exactly scream comfort. But no one argues with the process. The land says go, so they go. You help where you can, coiling cords, rolling furs, untangling harnesses for the dogs. The camp is shifting not in chaos but in choreography. Everyone has a job. Everyone knows the tempo. It's not fast, it's steady. And what about the dogs? They're antsy. They know too. You see it in the way they watch the pole piles, sniff the packed bundles, wag their tails whenever someone walks by with a travois harness. They've done this before. They're ready, waiting. So now here's the question scholars like to fight about. Why didn't these camps become permanent villages once the tribes had horses and could settle more easily? Some suggest it was pressure from other groups. Others claim the land demanded mobility. But the strongest voices argue this. Mobility was a strength, not a flaw. It wasn't that people couldn't build towns, it's that towns couldn't move when the land changed. A tipi could. That evening, the last meal in this camp is cooked. It's quiet, reflective. A few final patches are sewn, a few loads tightened. Smoke rises from fewer fires now. You walk through the camp and realise tipis are half gone. What had been a village yesterday is now a memory in motion. Nothing left behind but footprints in thawing snow and the faint ash of extinguished hearths. Tomorrow you'll walk again, north, maybe east, wherever the grass promises better hunting. The wind will shift, the poles will sway, and someone will lift their hand to the horizon and say, there. But tonight, the fire still burns in the tipi for one last sleep. The walls know they'll rise again, somewhere new. The sky's pale and open when the camp finally begins to move. Not blue, not yet, but that soft silver grey that hints at spring without committing to it. The sun is still somewhere beyond the clouds, and the wind is polite enough to stay quiet, for now. One by one, the last standing tipis come down, their skins carefully unpinned, their poles lowered in practiced unison. The ground beneath them is cold but dry, scarred with the circular imprint of months of warmth and life. And just like that, a village disappears. You're part of the caravan now. The poles are strapped into a long bundle and fastened to dogs and horses alike. Travois creak slightly under their loads. Buffalo robes, cooking tools, wrapped hides, and sleeping bundles stacked with the elegance of centuries of practice. Everyone walks, even the little ones, for as long as they can. This is not a lazy meander. It's not a desperate rush. It's purposeful movement, the way a flock shifts or a river bends. Natural, necessary. The wind picks up as you walk, not fierce, but sharp enough to remind you that winter's fingers still linger. The ground is patchy. Snow here, bare dirt there, grass peeking through in tired tufts. The group moves in a long, slow line, bending around frozen creek beds, winding through sparse tree groves, keeping to the ridges where the sun hits earlier and the footing is better. No one is talking much. Breathing is conserved, eyes scanning, steps steady. You walk behind an elder who hums softly with each step like she's keeping rhythm with the land. And here's the historical truth of it. These migrations were not chaotic or haphazard. They were scheduled by the land, by the animals, by the stars even. There were certain times of year when you knew you had to move, before the ground turned to slush, before the game shifted north, before the spring floods cut off old trails. Move too soon and you suffer cold. Too late and you're swimming with your gear. But the timing today feels right. Not lucky, correct. You feel it in the way the snow gives just enough under your feet, the way the clouds hang but don't threaten, the way the animals you pass, hares, magpies, a distant fox, don't flee in panic, just watch you pass like they've seen it before. By midday, the group stops for a rest. The bundles are lowered, the animals watered, a small fire is kindled, but just one. This isn't a place to linger, just a breath in the journey. You drink warm broth from a leather pouch, chew some dried meat, and rest your legs. Children roll around in the slush, laughing, pelting each other with fistfuls of not quite snow, not quite mud. You smile even though your shoulders ache and your boots have rubbed your ankles raw. A woman nearby is readjusting her travois, carefully shifting weight from one bundle to another, and she explains the logic to you with quiet efficiency. Heavier gear up front, softer bedding at the back. If it snows again, protect the meat. If the wind shifts, rewrap the fire starting kit first. Every choice is small, but every choice matters. Here's your quirky fact for the day. Some families decorated their tipi poles, even during moves. Not flashy, not elaborate, just subtle paint marks, maybe a carved ring, a burnished symbol. For luck, or memory, or guidance. Some said a pole painted red would point you in the right direction if you got turned around in a snowstorm. Others believed certain poles shouldn't touch the ground more than necessary. They were sacred, meant to be carried, not dragged. You walk again in the afternoon, and the land begins to open up. Hills slope gently now. The wind carries the scent of melting things. Earth, rot, fresh water. The occasional birdsong returns. You hear it for the first time in weeks and it catches you off guard, makes your chest tighten. It's not beautiful, not yet, but it's a sound with promise. Then, toward the horizon, someone lifts their hand. The line slows. Word spreads like a ripple. This is the place. It doesn't look like much at first. A flat rise gently sloped to the south, ringed by half-melted drifts and stubby trees still holding frost. But to those who know, it's perfect. There's windbreak from the north. A small creek runs nearby, tracks of elk in the thawing dirt, and most importantly, dry ground. You don't want to raise a teepee on slush, not unless you like sleeping in a puddle. The group begins to unpack. Poles are slid free and laid out like giant ribs. The hides are unrolled, brushed free of frost, inspected for wear. The area is cleared, quick but respectful. No shouting, no chaos. You watch it happen. A village builds itself again, one pole at a time. Let's pause for a debated point. Some historians argue that the speed with which a camp could set up shop was exaggerated. They say raising a teepee was complex and required long practice. Others, especially those who've lived it, say the opposite. It's only complicated if you're doing it wrong. For those raised with it, the process becomes muscle memory. The teepee wants to stand, you just have to help it rise. And it does. The first one goes up within half an hour, a skeleton of poles lashed together and hoisted skyward, the hide pulled around and laced neatly, smoke flat poles angled just so. Anchored. Ready. Then another, and another. The circle forms again, not random but based on custom. Family groups clustered, doors facing east, elders toward the back, a village breathing again. By evening, fires are lit inside. Not for survival this time, but for comfort. The air still bites, but now it smells like cooking meat and fresh cedar. Someone sings as they finish adjusting the smoke flaps. Children have already picked out their sleeping corners. The dogs collapse, exhausted but satisfied. You sit in your newly re-erected lodge, watching the fire spark to life, and feel something strange. A sense of permanence in the middle of impermanence. This place is temporary, Everyone knows that. But the feeling it gives, that warmth, that steadiness, is real. It always is. And here's the part you didn't expect. You missed the old spot. Just a little. Not because it was warmer or better or easier, but because you were someone different there. And now you're here. Changed. Tomorrow the tasks begin again. Wood gathering, meat scouting, trail checking. Spring brings new work. But tonight you sleep in a tipi that has moved with you, grown with you, held its shape through snow, silence and sun, and you realise home was never the place. It was the way you carried it. By now you've been living with the tipi for weeks, maybe even months. You've learned how it breathes, how it holds heat and sheds smoke, how it hums in the wind like a low drum when the cold really settles in. You've slept in its silence, woken to its drafty corners, watched snowflakes drift through its smoke hole like ash. But today you're about to discover something a little surprising, because while the tipi might seem like a relic of the past, frozen in history and locked in winter scenes, it's actually not gone. It's still here, right now, and people are still living in it. You've moved camps, watched the seasons shift, packed and unpacked your life with everyone else, and now you find yourself in conversation with someone who's never left the tipi behind. Not metaphorically, not nostalgically, literally. You're sitting across from a Lakota woman in her 50s, and her eyes crinkle as she stokes the fire with practiced ease. Around you, the tipi smells of cedar, sage, and something slow-cooked. It's not a reenactment. It's not a demonstration. It's just her life. "We never stopped," she says, smiling. "They just stopped asking." And that's the first clue. Tipi life didn't vanish. It just stopped getting airtime. There are still native families who use tipis seasonally, some for ceremonies, some for teaching their children, some for hunting trips, and some, like her, for full seasons, for the peace, for the way it reconnects them to everything the modern world has tried to fast-forward through. You look around, the construction is the same. 3 main poles to start the frame, 12 to 15 more in a careful bundle, a long, buffalo hide flap for the door, wooden pins, cordage, rocks weighing down the lower edge, and it's warm. Not perfectly climate-controlled, not fake fireplace cosy, but real, alive. There's moisture in the air, warmth in the dirt floor, a hum of voices outside. A camp is set up here. Not dozens of people, just a few families, but that's enough. Here's a fact that rarely gets talked about. Some native communities across the plains still raise tipis every year. Not for tourists, not for show, but because the design still works. Better, in fact, than most tents or prefab shelters. They're storm-resistant, breathable, portable, sustainable. You're sitting inside architecture that's outlived empires, and there are reasons why it continues. First, the practicality. The tipi can go up in under an hour. It can come down just as fast. The materials can be harvested locally, if not from bison hides anymore, then from treated canvas made to behave like the old hides did. The poles are still cedar or lodgepole pine, chosen carefully and used for years. The smoke hole still vents upward like a chimney, and the inner liner still insulates against the wind. But more than that, there's something spiritual at work here. You can feel it in the way the tipi wraps around you, not enclosing but cradling. The way the fire in the centre becomes both heat and heartbeat. The way you hear the night in layers, wind against the poles, dogs breathing outside, owls calling, someone coughing a few tipis away. The woman across from you tells stories between tasks. How she lived in a house for years and never felt at peace. How she came back to this structure, even if just for part of the year, and her dreams came easier. Her words slowed down. Her children laughed more. "We weren't meant to live in square boxes," she says, shrugging. "Not all of us." And here's a quirky truth. Some modern tipi dwellers add solar panels, charge their phones, and cook with propane stoves, but they still centre their days around the fire. The old ways and the new ways don't always fight. Sometimes they blend. You step outside and take in the scene. A ring of tipis, smoke rising lazily from the tops. A couple of solar lanterns strung from a line. A drying rack with herbs. Children with windblown hair and worn boots playing tag around a pile of firewood. It's not a museum. It's not curated. This is a living rhythm. And still, there's tension. Some nearby towns try to regulate tipi dwellers. Zoning codes, sanitation laws, noise complaints. The old structure, which once defined innovation and independence, is now occasionally treated like a problem. But the people here know how to adapt. They've been doing it since before asphalt. Now, let's touch on an open debate. How much of traditional life can be reclaimed through structures like the tipi? Some say it's symbolic, a way to honour the past. Others argue it's a practical route towards sovereignty and cultural repair. Still others think it's both, and more. The tipi isn't a relic, it's a language, and when people live in it again, they're not just sheltering from the elements, they're speaking the land's grammar. You help adjust the smoke flaps, something you thought you'd mastered until the wind changes direction, and suddenly everything smells like fire and regret. She laughs and repositions them with one tug of a line. The smoke lifts, the air clears. It's a dance, she says. You gotta listen. And that's the through line, isn't it? All the way back to that frozen night at 29°C. Listening. Not to machines or apps or weather reports. To the tipi itself. To the wind. To the fire's needs. To the creak of a pole that's been stressed too far. To the dog that won't settle. To the silence that sometimes tells you more than speech ever could. You walk through the small camp one more time, the sun now slipping low, the air crisp with early spring frost. Someone waves from a distance. Someone else carries a log across their shoulders, whistling. A child stomps through a puddle and gets scolded, then comforted. Life unfolds slowly here, but intentionally. You realise the tipi isn't just about the past. It's a place where time behaves differently. Tomorrow you'll leave this camp. You'll take with you the smell of cedar smoke in your coat, the feel of hide under your hands, the echo of low songs sung in the cold. But tonight, you're sleeping in a structure that has survived ice, colonization, regulation, and centuries of change. And it's still standing, still warm, still waiting for whoever needs it next. By now, the tipi doesn't feel like something you're staying in. It feels like something you're wearing, like a second skin, stitched from wind and memory, soft in the right places and tough where it matters. When you walk through its flaps at night, you're not entering a building. You're re-entering a rhythm, one that started long before you got here and will keep going long after you leave. It's your last night in camp. You know this in your chest more than in your mind. No one said anything official. There's no ceremony, no big send-off, but the way people glance at you a little longer, the way someone slips you an extra hunk of smoked meat, the way a child hugs your leg without looking up, it all says the same thing. You've been here long enough to be part of the story. You sit near the fire and let the warmth crawl slowly into your knees, your hands, your face. It's one of those perfect tipi fires. Not too smoky, not too hot, not sputtering. It burns steady, with the confidence of 1,000 generations behind it. Above, the poles stretch like ribs toward the smoke hole, and beyond that, stars are beginning to stud the sky. No glass between you and the night, no walls, just hide, fire, and sky. You look around the circle, familiar faces, lit in the flickering orange of the flames. There's the elder who taught you how to pack snow around the base of the tipi so wind couldn't sneak in. There's the woman who showed you how to fold your robe so your knees wouldn't freeze while you slept. There's the child who once hit you square in the eye with a snowball and then panicked like they'd killed you. All of them sitting, eating, talking, living, and the tipi, you realise, is a reflection of that. Here's your final historical fact. The tipi wasn't just a shelter, it was a mirror of the world. The fire at the centre represented life, spirit, connection. The smoke hole was the gateway to the sky, to creator, to dreams. The circle of the lodge echoed the cycles of the seasons, the circle of the sun, the shape of the community itself. When someone was born, they came into the tipi. When someone died, they were mourned in it. You didn't just live in the tipi, you lived through it. Even now, in a world of electricity and engineered insulation and digital fireplaces, some people still choose to come back to this simple, genius structure. Not because it's easy, not because it's nostalgic, but because it teaches something no house ever could. It teaches how to listen, to wind, to flame, to each other, to yourself. Here's a lesser-known, slightly fringe fact that sticks with you. Some spiritual teachers say the tipi amplifies dreams, that sleeping within its circle under its poles with a fire flickering close by opens a path to deeper rest. Not just better sleep, but messages, direction, clarity. Whether or not that's measurable, Who cares? You believe it. You felt it. Tonight, after the meal, someone begins a song. It's not in English. It's older, throatier, more like prayer than performance. A few others join in. No instruments, just voices. And somehow, the sound wraps around the curve of the lodge like the walls were built to hold it. You sit very still. Not because you're afraid to interrupt, but because something about it feels sacred. Not fragile. Important. A reminder that, even though you're leaving, the tipi isn't. It stays, with its keepers, with the land, with anyone who needs to remember how to be human in a world that forgets more every day. You lie down on your last night and pull the robe up to your chin. The fire has been banked. The smoke hole flaps are just open enough to show a single star peeking through. The poles above you creak faintly as the wind nudges them. You know every sound now, every draft, every flap of hide, and you realise you're not cold. It's not just the fire, it's what you've learned, how to layer, how to breathe, how to fold your thoughts like blankets and tuck them close, how to make a home out of snow and bone and hide and hope. Tomorrow you'll walk away from this place, but you won't leave it behind, because part of the tipi goes with you. Not the poles or the hide, not the physical shape, but the way it made space for you, the way it taught you that being still is an act of power, that silence isn't empty, that warmth isn't just something you feel, it's something you build. So now, as the fire settles into coals and your body sinks into sleep, know this: you lived through the cold, through the snow, through the long nights and creaking walls, and you didn't just survive, you learned.